There it goes. Please take your seats. It's 6 p.m., and I'd like to call to order this County Board study session, Tuesday, September 24th at 6 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Petrie. Here. Quisenberry. Here. Richards. Rosales. Schrader. Here. Schwartz. Here. Alex. Here. Berkson.
Here.
Carter. Cowart. Esri.
Here.
Harper.
Here.
Hartke.
Here.
James. Here. Jay. Here. Kibler.
Here.
Langenheim. Maxwell. McGuire.
Present.
Michaels. Here. Mitchell.
Here.
Kurtz.
Here. We have a quorum. May I have a motion for approval of the agenda, please? Mr. James, second by Mr. Hartke. Any objections or changes? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Have a read the notice of the meeting, please.
Notice is hereby given that a study session of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on September 24th, 2013, 6 p.m. in the Lyle Childs Meeting Room, Perkins Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, for a presentation of the final Champaign County Jail study.
Thank you. Motion to accept. So moved by Mr. Esri. Second, please. Ms. Berkson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next order of business is the final report presentation by Dr. Kalmanoff of ILPP. He's been working on this for quite a long time, and this will be his final report to us. After this report, we will have public comment, and I will go over the ground rules at that time. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Kalmanoff and his final report.
How much time do you want me to take? How much time do you want me to take?
Take the time you need. This is an important report, and we've been waiting a long time for it. Just take your time, sir.
Well, okay, but the public comment is important too, and I just
We'll
wonder.
have time for that as well.
Okay. Well, one of the things that happens after you do 450 counties is you get to the last day and the final report sitting in front of you, and you have this terrible feeling like summer camp is over, or your first romance has fallen on the rocks. There's a feeling of incompletion because I'm leaving you guys with a big agenda, and I'm not going to be here to watch it get implemented or be part of it, and I'm not holding out my hand to ask you to hire me to come back to be part of it, because that's not the way the game works. But you have a lot to do. The report is highlighted by the fact that a great deal has already been implemented of the major findings that we called for action on. And that's probably stuff that y'all don't know about. But let me just say, starting with the police departments in this county, there have been major changes in policy and practice. They're not very visible to you, and they're probably not visible to the general public, but they're visible in the small amount of people who are not being arrested and transported to jail only to be released again after clogging the system for a little while. There's been changes in the use of the arrest function, and there have been increases in the use of something called citation in lieu of arrest, which is a way of saying, look, you committed a crime, and you have to face the judge, and you have to face the state attorney, and you have to be held accountable, but you're not dangerous to anybody. We know who you are. We know where you live. And we don't think that you're going to fail to show up in court tomorrow or the next day when you're required to. Therefore, we issue you a ticket and send you home. That's a very, very important change. That change has occurred and is increasingly occurring. And it's emblematic of a lot of things that have happened in the county. Now, going to the really big issue that started this job. Remember, there was this issue of a $20 million high-rise jail versus programs, the way it was when I first came in. Y'all remember that fight? Come on. That fight was a bit bogus because it really never was a $20 million jail. There were calculations made about what would it take if we built a new jail. And there were discussions that kind of got well past polarization to not be productive. At the moment, our report does not recommend that you build a new jail. And it doesn't recommend much that you build, but it lays out what you'd need to build starting soon if other recommendations in the report are not implemented over time. So there are major maintenance and construction improvements that you probably need to do real soon, maybe within 3, 4, or 5 months. But the Sheriff's Department has been working very closely with one of our consultants to develop interim ways of dealing with the problems the buildings have in the meanwhile. And eventually, you either will or you will not have to do some building. Will it be a big, brand-new jail that you can't afford? I don't think so. I don't think so. But we'll have to see. The problem with the study and the problem with this report is it's a system. So everything influences everything in a system. So that few people who probably shouldn't have been arrested regularly over the past years that are now not getting arrested, meaning transported and incarcerated, makes a big difference, a real big difference. And then the next stage is pretrial release. And we have to sort of see whether that's actually implemented. There's been some work in that direction, but it hasn't been implemented yet. If that's implemented, it'd be hard to imagine you need any new beds forever. Not forever, but for a very long time. There are beds and there are spaces and there are who goes in them. When we got here, the classification system in the jail was lacking. Currently, you're about to have a first-rate classification system. The sheriff hasn't waited for the report, hasn't waited for anything other than to see the benefits of better classification, and they're beginning to occur. There's a position in the budget, and there's an instrument, and there are mechanisms and procedures in place to start allocating the existing bed space in a better, safer way. So those are the kinds of things that have already happened. Classification, and there is actually a plan to put up a temporary partition in a satellite jail and move the women from the downtown jail out to the satellite jail, and then eventually do away with the downtown jail. There's also an idea floating around, I don't know if it has any traction or not, but I'm trying to find some federal money to use the downtown jail as a federal jail, which would do a lot of interesting things. But the final report isn't final because it marks the beginning, not the end. It marks the beginning of a whole lot of changes that are already being implemented or being discussed. The major recommendation that said you need a criminal justice advisory board. There already was a criminal justice advisory board when I got here, only it was very informal. It's now more formal. It's not called an advisory board, it's called a Criminal Justice Executive Council. It doesn't have every member that I recommended, but it has all the members that are needed to do the job, which is to manage the criminal justice system. So that's already in place. It's not had a chance to accomplish all that much, but it is responsible for that first major reform of getting the police departments to start citing instead of just arresting as much. Big change, big change. So in this report, the major themes are to improve the setting of priorities. There are a huge number of criminal justice cases of different kinds. How do you deal with them? For instance, one of the biggest cases that comes into the criminal justice system is domestic violence. Get a report from a neighbor, somebody's screaming help, da-da-da-da-da, police respond, and it's a violent incident within a family. Does that sound like state prison? No. Does that sound like something you can fix by an arrest? No. So what do? It requires the community and the cities and the county and the criminal justice agencies to work together to develop, one, emergency responses to separate the parties so no damage occurs tonight, all the way to the end where you have programs that reduce the incidence of domestic violence because of counseling, because of using the system to push people into counseling, because of a variety of system features, not any single one. It's the same with a lot of other kinds of behavior. You have a whole lot of people in your system that are picked up and clog your system because they're drunk in public, they're disorderly in public, they're aggressive panhandling, they're urinating in the park, they're bothering people, they're walking down the middle of the street disrupting traffic. Most of them are stuff that you could say, well, leave them alone. But you can't leave them alone if you live in that neighborhood. You don't want them to be left alone. They're people who are creating disorder and damage to your community in ways that are very hard to measure, but come with the call to the police and asking for help. And the police are in a position of not being able to say, it's not important, we have gang warfare to take care of, or shootings, we have to concentrate on that. And you just have to deal with your shoplifter or your aggressive panhandler or your disorderly person. So there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of problems in the criminal justice system, and they're going to have to be managed and hashed out. You don't want to use the jail for all of them, but you're obviously going to have some kind of jail. So what the report says is you need to prioritize and focus on those things that are most important, and look at those things that are causing you the most workload pressure. The most workload pressure, and focus on trying to lower that workload pressure. For example, a risk assessment instrument, whether it occurs in the police car as to whether or not take that guy to jail or not, it's a risk assessment instrument when I stop him for a misdemeanor and then I decide not to take him to jail. I'm assessing the risk that he'll do something bad tonight after this thing I just caught him at. And I'm assessing the risk of whether or not he'll show up at trial in a court. And the law says if he's not going to do any damage and he is going to show up in court, he should not go to jail tonight. He should get a ticket. It's a risk assessment by the officer. Same thing is needed in the courts for pretrial. Same thing is needed throughout the system in order to decide who to process and who to do work on and who not to. So the report is lengthy and detailed and covers a lot of ground in the area of prioritization and risk assessment instrument. Looking at different groups of people and saying, what are the likelihood of danger, fleeing, whatever. Now, there are other recommendations in this report. The police have a recommendation in there to focus more on the repeat, serious, bad people that can be identified and develop enforcement strategies targeted towards them. Looking at the 100 most frequently arrested or the 100 most frequently charged with a felony or the 100 most frequent households that call the police, and focusing on the problems that are causing the workload to the system, trying to sort of put an end to some of those problems or get control of them. There are other recommendations about your facilities. Maintenance is one of the big ones. You don't maintain your facilities. It's not you, it's the past board, but it's the board that doesn't like to spend money on maintenance. You're going to have to. You're going to have to spend money on maintenance, and you're going to have a maintenance schedule, or else you're going to get sued for an unconstitutional facility one of these days and spend the money, a lot more money, defending a lawsuit or paying damages. There are a lot of other recommendations in this report, a lot of other findings, but the bottom line is prioritize and assess risk and focus on workload reduction where risk does not justify the workload. Now, it's very important that the folks in the county understand that a great many changes have already occurred because of this study. You got a sheriff who, I think it would be fair to say, started off saying, just give me a new jail, who instead has tackled a whole bunch of policy issues within the law enforcement and corrections environment and made great progress. Let me give you a good example. Mental health. When we got here, there was a disconnect between mental health and the correction system and the jail. There really wasn't much going on, but there was this little spinning wheel in the front of the jail of mentally ill people coming in, often without their meds, decomposing or decompressing, whatever you want to call it, in the jail, acting out, becoming real problems in the jail, eventually getting out, often again without their meds, being out on the street, coming back in, being out on the street, coming back in, and not really a systematic approach to the mentally ill. There are problems that aren't going to go away with the mentally ill because there aren't enough institutions, and state or local, to deal with mental health problems of people who don't have the money to go and get a psychiatrist or go to a mental health clinic. But now there are mental health workers in the jail, and there's a contract, and there's kind of an understanding that if you don't get somebody their meds right when they get booked, they're going to give you trouble in the jail. And if you don't get somebody their meds 2 or 3 days supply on the street, they're going to come back into the jail because they're going to act out. That sounds simple, doesn't it? But that's a major change. Now, you have to be vigilant about this because in the past, years and years ago, that wasn't a problem, and then it became a problem. And then it's sort of been fixed lately. So that's just an example. Now, I'm not sure how far to go with this report and with this summary because the report is a summary, and it has a list, and it has an action plan, and I can kind of better answer questions from the board,
It's up to you.
I think, than I can just sit here and run my mouth.
Okay. Let's first have questions from the county board. Chris?
Yeah, Cal, I think I grasped this in your report, but I think there may be members of the public and members of the board who aren't as familiar with the process. I'm wondering if you can sort of describe the significant differences between the pretrial evaluation program proposed in the study and what currently takes place in terms of research on an offender by the state's attorney's office that goes into a bail recommendation. You know, what will happen differently if the pretrial program is implemented compared to what happens now?
Well, the shortest possible answer is the use of an objective instrument designed to predict behavior. That would be the big difference. Although the state's attorney and the courts have, I think on principle, agreed to begin to use an instrument to do that. But it hasn't been put into effect yet, and exactly where it will be used and with what impact and what feed into the decisions about release from jail are not yet worked out. And that's a disappointment to me, if you want to know the truth. But let me try to explain it. Chris Alex gets arrested on a misdemeanor, gets to jail. Ideally, one of Captain Jones's people in the jail fills out a little questionnaire with points assigned for how long you've lived in the community, if you have a job, what your prior record is, whether it involved violence or kids or sex crimes or drugs, whether you've been given the opportunity before to show up at trial and didn't, questions that relate to danger to the community and likelihood of appearance, propensity to appear. And at some point you get a score. And if the score is at a level that has shown in the past to be one that predicts you're going to show up at trial and you're not a danger to the community, you're out before you're in. And most jurisdictions in this country, I'm going to say that again, in most jurisdictions in this country, you don't even get into jail clothes. You're out. You're given a ticket in the jail because you weren't given one on the street. Now we know a little more about you, and you're given a ticket in the jail to show up at an arraignment. And your county, of course, at that point is in great shape because you do arraignments fast. But that isn't happening right now. And there's some resistance to that. I think the instrument is considered in many ways undignified by a lot of people in the system as dictating what their discretion should be. And it's very hard to make the argument, which I make all the time, that it's not meant to replace discretion, it's meant to augment or support it. But it takes a while. Nobody, you've heard me say this, likes change but a wet baby. And I would say that judges, more than most people, don't want to be told how to change. And so that's the issue. Have I answered your question?
I think you've spoken to it. If I can have a follow-up, which has nothing to do with the question, but I'll call it a follow-up anyway. Put on my finance chair hat here. One of the things you accused us of, for better or for worse, is an excess of fiscal conservatism in the past in terms of facilities spending and so forth. And I just, I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but, you know, Champaign County does have property tax caps in effect, and we're not a home rule unit. So essentially, there's a formula that the state has handed down to us that tells us how much money we're going to get in tax dollars every year. We can't do what the cities can do and vote to raise their sales tax, or do what the, you know, other home rule units can do and vote to raise their property tax. So, you know, over the last, 10, 15 years, there's been some lean years, and the county's gone through layoffs and we've gone through furloughs. You know, we have had one county administrator where most of our comparable counties have 4 or 5.
Well, you have 4 or 5 in one.
Well, I would, we certainly think so, but she's not compensated accordingly, fortunately.
She should be.
And I guess you can see what I'm getting at with this.
Yeah.
I mean, health costs go up, energy costs go up, state mandates go up. You know, we had to bail out the nursing home to the tune of a couple $1 million. So we've a little been short on cash for the last decade. Have you found, and I didn't really see this in the report, but I want to give you an opportunity to speak to it. Are there things that we are doing, other than perhaps incarcerating too many people, which we could save money by not doing?
Yes.
Are there programs that we're doing in the criminal justice area that are ineffective, that we shouldn't be spending money on, so that we can repurpose those monies to some of the more worthy recommendations in the proposal? Or are we pretty much already doing what we should be doing and just need to be doing more?
A difficult question for me to answer. A very difficult question. Not because I'm timid either.
No,
It's,
if we knew the answer, we would have done it by now.
there are places I've been where I see a huge amount of money spent on something called Weed and Seed, which is a federal program that gives grants to police departments to focus on drug issues in a community, and extra enforcement, and that's the weed part, and extra programs that will deal with the issue of kids and drugs. That's the SEED program. And everywhere that I've evaluated that, which I haven't here, I find there's plenty of weed, no seed. And I don't mean that figuratively.
Yeah.
So I can't comment on that here because we haven't done kind of a major police enforcement and analysis of where every dollar goes to each police department. But obviously, it's an issue of prioritization, and violence tends to be the #1 priority. Violence. Are you afraid of the guy on your porch? So that guy needs to go to jail if you're afraid of that guy on your porch. If he's on your porch, it's 4 in the morning, and you're afraid, it's a danger to you and your family, he needs to go to jail. So you mentioned very quickly and in passing, other than not putting so many people in jail. And I guess, wanting not to be an advocate or a political person in your world wanting to have the stature of an outside, independent, objective consultant who doesn't bring his or her own values to bear on Champaign County values. I think you all need to clarify your values and have some discussions about what is the purpose of a jail and what do you expect your law enforcement folks to do. To me, now I am talking about my values. I don't come from here. I worked all my life, but I haven't worked like John Jay. I haven't worked on a farm. I haven't worked alone. I haven't worked in the country. I haven't worked in a bad economy, actually, in my whole life. I'm very cautious about using cages for humans that are not a danger to other humans. So when I look at your jail, there are people in your jail who end up in there because of traffic. Not the dangerous kind, as in aiming a car at somebody to try to kill them, but the dangerous kind, as in driving with a revoked license. Often from a DUI. Often from something that probably is dangerous. But is jail, or is it better to have a work program, or some kind of anti-abuse program where anytime they get near alcohol, they get violently ill? Are there ways to avoid using cages for people who are not dangerous, as in, on my porch, I'm afraid? You would have, I think, a jail of 60, 80 beds if you did that. Maybe 100. Where you just had beds for people who are actually dangerous to your citizens and needed to be taken off the street and put in a cage. But having that discussion, based on the data that we collected in here, I think is a big money discussion. It's a big money discussion. And you know, y'all are running 2 jails. That's a big money discussion, because you don't have to go too many beds shorter than you are right now to not run 2 jails. And the sheriff is experimenting, greatly to his credit, with ways to try to do without the 2 jails, although it may take a little while of dealing with 2 jails to get to not dealing with 2 jails. It's not something you throw a light switch on. But I think the sheriff's working very hard to do without. On the other hand, the motivation from the sheriff's department for this study was, you know, you have suicides in that jail, you have situations in that jail where people are getting sick, you have conditions that will get you sued and cost you more. So it's not simple. It's sorting out your priorities. So accusing you of being fiscally conservative is probably a compliment in a lot of ways. I don't like to see money just thrown at problems. But you do need some programs that are recommended in here. You need a reentry program so that people don't come back as easily to the jail. You need classification, and it's happening. It's going to cost a little bit of money, but I think it'll save a lot. You need mental health, as in not leaving it undealt with, but dealing with it directly. That's beginning to happen. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
I think you did great. Thanks, Cal.
Thanks, Chris. Josh?
Yeah, Cal, again, thank you for all your work on this, and also just kind of, I'd like to generally thank the countywide officials who've already taken steps to move ahead on this out of their own volition. I hope that that's a sign that this board can follow suit in doing that. Sounds to me like what you're saying is we as a county need to make an investment in these programs that will pay off in returns down the road by lowering our overall jail count, to put it simply. The idea being that we put money in now that maybe we cannot entirely afford or is easy to afford, but we make these moves and get these situations, these programs set up so that down the road we are only housing maybe 100 inmates instead of, you know, the average of 2 or whatever the number ends up becoming. So, and looking at your report, a lot of what you're talking about is how if we invest in these ideas, some being almost zero cost, we are going to save money in the long run. We are going to have to be patient and follow those and set up metrics so we can measure those returns.
Yes to everything except the word now and down the road and a couple other things you said about the timeline. If you were able, how can I put this? If you were able to throw a switch and this would be implemented now, you have enormous savings. It wouldn't be down the road at all. We did a reentry program in Allegheny County. Many of you know that I spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh. I spent 10 years there. And near the end, we established a jail reentry program. Of course, they have 2,500 inmates. So it's not the same thing as having 250 or whatever, but we were able, with that jail reentry program, to cut recidivism in half. So the plan for a new jail that they had on the books and had already hired an architect for and had the site prepared for, scraped, stopped cold, and they didn't build it. Is that down the road? It was actually just about a year and a half after the program started, because it showed a 50% reduction in recidivism. What is a jail reentry program? Well, it's getting your inmate's entire family down to the jail about a week and a half after they're booked in and settled for it's going to be a 3-month or a 6-month stay, and starting to talk about coming home. It's making sure that somebody doesn't get out of jail and find somebody else in their bed, speaking bluntly. It's making sure that there's some hope of putting some money in that fellow, I'm going to talk about men mostly, that fellow's pocket within a week or two after getting home, so that that corner where he made a living on before is no longer the second of 2 jobs he has available to them, but it's the only one available. So the results are immediate. They're not down the road. They're not long-term. But it is going to be down the road and some long-term for you all do all the stuff that's in the report. It's a modern, best practice criminal justice system that uses jail only for dangerous people who represent a risk here and now to their citizens. It uses other programs to punish, much cheaper programs. It uses programs to make sure that people are in jail are really captured in a different way than the word means on the cowboy movie. Captured meaning, we got you now. This is the only chance we're going to have to give you a chance to not come back in 3 months when you're released. We have 3 months to work with you is what that means. Do you have the programs in the jail to do that? Now, the sheriff will correctly say, do we have the space to put those programs in? And that's where I'm getting my shovel and cement out, because he does need space. There is some construction that's needed. But I'm not sure I'm going to get an argument when I say I don't think you need net new beds. You need some different beds. You need some different spaces. And it's greatly to the sheriff's credit that they're talking about partitions and ways of wiggling and making it work to try to see how this report will come out over time. Does that answer your question? I just would hate to see the headline that says invest now and 10 years, you know. That's not what this report said. This report says there's ways to stop letting the caseload drive the workload the way it is now and to do it smarter. It's not more liberal by any means. It's just smarter.
Okay, John? Great. Astrid, microphone, please.
This is just a comment, but about the objective questionnaires, because I suspect they wouldn't make a whole lot of difference now. But anyone who's been around for our previous sheriffs and some of our previous state's attorneys knows we should have some objective questionnaire there just in case.
Well, yeah, but you want to, this is, no offense, Astrid, because I've had a chance to work with you and I have a very high regard for you, but this is not the time to talk about the bad ones, because you got good ones
We
now.
got good ones, and but we need to have something in place just in case in the future.
I'm afraid that something in place is not going to deal with bad law enforcement if you get it in the future, but I don't think you'll get it.
Thank you. Stan?
Couple of comments and then a good question for you.
How
First
can
of
I be
all,
sure it's going to be good?
oh, you're going to love me. First of all, the comment that I'd like to make is when I hear all this about, you know, the assessment tool and everything, I believe that is a good tool. When I was a young man growing up, I think police officers had a lot of discretion and used that, but then lawsuits developed and people got mad about they weren't doing their job right or they knew so-and-so, so they gave them a break. So some of it's state laws, it's not local laws, so we got to give the police department that due. I mean, we can't just say they got more discretion than we can legally give them. So with that said, we've had that discussion. The other thing is, when I hear about this plan or starting new programs, I always worry about the funding, number one. But if we haven't been able to take care of the issue of the buildings up to date, as the report says, and as we all know, now we're going to go off and start a new funding source and try to maintain some programs that we really haven't corrected the other issues yet. So I think we really need to get back on track with some of that issue first and move forward. And I understand you're saying cost savings. Well, every time I hear cost savings, I think we got to raise a new tax to offset the savings we thought we were going to have, because I hear this constantly from Washington, D.C., the state, and on down. So that's my comments, but my other question is, when this study started, I thought I was going to be in the hopes of hearing a report on what our future needs were going to be and whether or not that downtown building could be rehab, not rehab, but in your report you sort of say yes and no and maybe. But the bottom line with me is, where do we head? I mean, these programs are going to be helpful, but if the state mandates, like a drunk driver has to go to jail, we got no choice. So
Well, no, you
What
have a
are you
choice.
saying that-
Well, you buy a motel and put a county jail sign on the front of it and get a Burns guard or one of your sheriff's deputies, only one, to run it as a drunk driver jail for lightweight people who are in that building.
And believe you me, that would be fine in some instances, but if I was a parent sent home, like some cases have had, and it was a third DUI, and somebody was seriously hurt, I think most people in this room are going to want what they consider justice, whether that be domestic violence or DUI. And also with your recommendation on that part, it still takes money. And I know that in the state's attorney's office, she's had an adult diversion panel and other things. They work well, but they only work at the funding's there, the staff's there, and other things are there. And I don't know, I guess in your report, I really didn't see, other than starting up some new programs to do with mental health and that's been pushed on us because of the state and other issues, I really didn't see anything that hit home with me that says, here is your best road to take and how to get to that road. I mean, some of the issues that are there are still there. The building issue is still going to be there. The space issues are still going to be there. And if you're talking about funding some of these other social service agencies, there's no way that we're going to have money to allocate to a new building and staff. So I thought you'd give me a clearer picture.
First of all, nobody's talking about a new building and staff as in new staff to run a building. Nobody. Be careful of that one. Nobody. I haven't heard that from anybody. I think that better space means less staff, not more, because staff is currently inefficiently used because the space is so terrible. Does that make sense to you?
Somewhat.
Well, you're a space guy. You run all kinds of facilities. You understand that a facility that's 100 yards long takes a long walk just to police it once, right? And if it's a circle, it's not so long?
That's why I was asking that question. You really didn't give us a clear direction on how to best suit the needs of the space we need.
No, I don't think that's true at all. There's a big section in there on direct supervision and podular direct supervision. If you're going to build any kind of housing unit, that it not be linear and intermittent surveillance, but it be direct supervision and podular.
But again, what you're saying there is that maybe we need to put money into that type of aspect, which is going to take away from the other programs you're saying that we need to also start up. See what I'm saying? You're not really saying you need to do this first to get to this point. You're saying here, for lack of a better term, is a hodgepodge of ideas that you need to focus on and put together. My thought was you were going to come back and say, based on your needs, based on the arrest records, based on what I'm seeing overall, here's your best course of action.
Okay, so what I think the best course of action is to start at the very front of the system and start bringing in fewer people who are just getting kicked right out again from the jail, because it takes a lot of workload to take an officer off the beat, away from crime control and away from patrol, to transport the county board chair to the county jail And then it takes a lot of effort on the part of the jail to book him in, fingerprint him and picture him and dress him down and put him in the back, categorize him correctly. That's like about a $500 event between the cop and the jail. And if that person is going to be right out again because a good risk assessment instrument or better training and policy at the front end with the police department would keep him from ever getting to jail, that's your first priority. And it's in there and it's already been done. How long will it take to show in the numbers? That's a little bit more sophisticated question, but it's already showing a bit. Captain Jones has got some data that shows that it's beginning to change the characterization of the statistical profile of who's in, how long they've been there, et cetera. The next step is Commissioner Alex's question about pretrial release, because without pretrial release, you probably will need to do some major building, and you won't be able to afford to do some programs. You get pretrial release, you probably can fix up what you've got, make some new spaces, cost some money, but you'll have less people, and you free some staff. But it's not a simple thing that you can say, if you only get rid of the dog, the household will run right. It's 10 things, 15 things. It's like a family system. Everything affects everything, and you can't just point to one thing. It's like a lot of people were talking about, oh, racial disparity. You got to eliminate racial disparity. You eliminate racial disparity with a lot of little things that you have to do. They're all in here. They need to be done. It's a major, major challenge for this county to eliminate racial disparity in the criminal justice system. It can be done a lot more than it is with risk assessment instruments. But it isn't going to happen with just one easy decision or one switch or one. But I do see evidence of change already in this county. There's progress already in this county. There's some places I'd like to see more. But it's not simple. And it's not a matter of just waiting to see programs occur over 5 or 10 years, as the question was asked earlier, long term. There are things that can be done real soon. And they're in here. I think they're in here. I think I know you well enough to know you've read this.
I've read what I can. There's quite a bit of information, but I will say, I mean, you have laid a lot of this out. But I was in hopes, like I said, you would have gave a better path or a better
you want
direction.
a magic bullet, man.
No, but yeah, but the sad thing is when we're sitting at the table and we have so many different groups pulling at us, each one wants to beat their drum and say, this is the path you need to go and this is what was said. And I realize that it's hard for you also because you're in a spot that you don't want to say this is what's best for your community because you don't live here. But I was, like I said, we started out with the buildings. There was never a plan that I'm aware of to build a new one. It was a discussion. And now you've come up with this other option, which to me is being forced on us by the state and other entities because they no longer want to do the job that they should be doing. And then somehow we're going to correct it, but we're doing it on the taxes of the local people and the entities, and there's only so much money. And, you know, we have to be careful with that. And then also, again, I keep going back to the buildings. I wanted a definite answer that the best course of action is here. This building really is not reusable for what it's intended to be. You need to lock it up as soon as possible, and you need to do this over here to accommodate these future needs.
Well, listen, we said it in the draft report, close the old jail and work on the satellite jail.
That was the draft report. Is it
Right.
in this new one?
I think it is. I think
You
it is.
think?
Yeah.
You wrote it.
Well, I know, I did. It's not said as simply because it isn't as simple as it turns out. It actually is useful to use part of the old jail for a while to take the pressure off the satellite jail, to see why certain programs take effect and classification shakes out and you see what your bed needs are. And you might very well, by this time next year, be saying, you know, that guy Kelmanoff, he told us to be patient, let the sheriff work this facility thing out, and now look at it, we've solved the problem. He needs some space. He doesn't need any new beds.
Well, I guess, Cal, what I'm trying to state here is that when we see these numbers and for some of these other programs, they have merit. There's not a doubt they have merit. We all know that. But I guess what I'm gonna be looking at is, I wanna fix what's already wrong to some extent before I start expanding where the funds are gonna go. I really wanna make sure that the satellite gel and everything else is gonna be up to where it needs to be. And the public needs to understand that there's things we need to do with the limited amount of money we have, that we just can't go off and say, we're gonna take this fund here to start something new. I think that we need to have that out on the table. I don't want people thinking that this report is gonna open up a whole bunch of venues for us.
Stan, I'd like to give some of the other board members a shot, please. I just like to argue. No, that's fine, thank you.
No, I like to argue with Stan, too. I'm frustrated.
Let's go to Patsy, please.
Anybody would like to argue with Stan. Just think about that for a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think there are two key sentences in your report that they're short, and I'd like to read them in the record because they fold in so nicely with the terrific conversation that has happened so far, and I think will happen the rest of the evening. The first one is on page 13, and it states, the answer is spending more money now to achieve savings with better targeted sanctioning of a smaller number of offenders. A strong data collection and evaluation capability is required to ensure this balance. And the second one is on page 19, at the bottom of the page, and it says, the board should also seek to obtain new tax revenue for future programs needs. And the way I read these, my analogy, my visual analogy is much of the argument and discussion that is put forth when it comes to doing energy saving aspects for buildings. You have to put some money up front, and then that saving plays itself out in 3, 4, 5 years. Am I understanding, using that analogy, am I understanding correctly these two sentences in the recommendation? Because I think it's really invigorating for us to have this conversation about our budget on the 1st of October. We're really going to have a long conversation about our county budget, and so you could be very helpful here.
Well, you're understanding them very well, except for the 3 or 4 or 5 years, which you didn't read in there. You put those numbers in there. I think that some things could happen real fast. I think a reentry program in place now, like the one that went in place in Allegheny that cut recidivism in half, would change the sheriff's facility issues in 6 months. So with that exception, I appreciate those two sentences being quoted, and Stan, just need to correct the time span on the one you added on to. Well, yeah, but that's not the right one. That's the one that says if you invest now, eventually this will pay off. And we got Stan James here saying it'll never happen. Never, never, never. Isn't that right? No, but go ahead. See, that's why I like to argue with him. No, you know that's what you're saying. You've said it to me. Come on, you said it to me. There are things that could be done. I'm not saying they will be, because change is not easy. And you have local officials who are not going to change very, very much more rapidly than they already have in the last year, and that's quite a lot, overnight. But if things are put into play overnight, the savings are immediate. That's the difference between what I think you did with that sentence and what I'm trying to fix. Just that one thing. You don't need to wait too long. If we could wave a magic wand and you had a best practice pretrial release system in place right now, as they have in most good counties in this country and most bad counties, actually. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere in the country. You just don't have one here. Then you'd have about 30, 40 less people in the jail. What would 30 or 40 less people in the jail do? Well, hell, that would not increase the danger to citizens, but it would decrease the pressure on these old buildings that haven't been maintained and weren't ever designed for the kind of people that they're in, to allow them to put those people in better spaces and have some space between. And then you just have to build a little program space, You'd have to build some program space in the jail. to do some programs that Commissioner James isn't sure he wants to do.
Jim?
Sure. I'd like to go on back to the conversation about the costs, some of the issues that the countywide public officials have, and Stan's comments. And what I don't see in the report, which is really some of the costs of these things, because we have a limited amount of money to spend, and I'm someone who supports many of these programs and have, but there's a limited amount of money, and if they're going to be successful, and we're going to do some of them, we have to have the money to do them.
Now, let's just talk about, I'm sorry.
Finish. You know, one of the discussions was talking about the, I guess they're calling it a sobering center, which obviously will cost money, but there's no list for the cost. And it was brought up, you know, when the public officials talk about their responsibility or the county's responsibility, you know, when you're talking about 1 or 2 DUIs, that's not a large issue. But there have been DUIs for 7, you know, the 7th or 8th DUI, and when that person gets back out because the sheriff or the state's attorney decides, let's put them in a sobering center, and that person kills somebody, which some of us have some experience with, that family is going to take that responsibility comes back on the county and those elected officials because they've made that determination to change what happens. So these are important issues for the county and the people involved. But I don't see a cost for this. When I look at the issue of the jail, when it talks about medical and mental health recommendations, it says provide appropriate space for an infirmary, segregate medical and mental health inmates. I don't see a cost there and how much that would cost. That's obviously going to take some changes. Serious money. Or even moving the women into the new jail, which I think is something we need to do because while it doesn't say go ahead and move out of the downtown jail, it doesn't direct us to do that, which is something I think we should do. It discusses using plywood partitions to do that. Now, obviously, it's going to take more than that. If they were able to get out of the downtown jail the way it's built, I think they'll figure out a way to get through a wooden partition in the new jail. It's going to take a significant amount of money to do those things. But I think one of the things that hasn't been discussed has been brought up, is a list of the things that we're trying to accomplish already with mental health. If the public defender's office, if that's put in the budget, some of those things are discussed and done. I think we need a list of what those things are, so we understand what we are actually doing, because that hasn't been quantified. I think we need a list of what some of these things really will cost, so we understand what their impact on the budget, how much money they're going to cost, and some idea from the sheriff, really what it'll cost to move the women down to the jail and in a secure manner, or an infirmary, or the mental health issues that has to deal with in the jail. Because I don't see it in here, which I would have wanted.
Yeah, I think I have to cop to that one. I'd like to give you a list of all the sort of major recommendations and costs, and maybe I'll try to do that before I get all done with this. I understand what you're saying. It's difficult to give you a list of things that need to be done where it isn't clear which ones need to be done. Right now, the system has begun to loosen up and change and get more modern in the way it's looking at workload and demand. That's a function of having been here for a year and having had these discussions. Right now, the system is beginning to loosen up and deal with problems like mental health without a lot of new money. Is that a fair statement? Been no new money. And yet, there are 2 mental health people in the jail and a lot more effective work in terms of not creating demand with frequent flyers coming in the front door of the jail who are mentally ill, who were caused to be worse by the lack of mental health services in and outside the jail. So it didn't cost anything. But I do think the list you're talking about of spaces that may very well have to be built, which I think is very easy to do and just wasn't done. Do I have a good excuse for why it wasn't done? Because there's so many hopeful things happening in the system that you can't exactly tell how many people are going to be in the jail at this time next year. And that would really help to understand what has to be done with the facilities. But all that's required to do one or the other of the solutions for facilities is in the report. And there are cost factors actually in the report, but it's just not laid out as a menu the way you're asking for it, because I think it's not ripe. That sounds mealy mouth? Yeah. Sounds kind of like I ought to be able to do this. So I'm going to take a shot at the menu and send you something.
Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Astrid and Cal, just wanted to follow up on something very quickly. The extension that we approved a few weeks ago allowed for the integration of the Community Justice Task Force and their recommendations with this report. I just wanted to make sure when comparing them, I did see some overlap, but I wanted to make sure that this report is fully inclusive and really is almost a superset of your report. Yeah. You feel that's good? Some of the things about women, yes. Okay. Well, good.
Except for some of the things about women? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So fair. So I wanted to make sure that when commenting through this, that we were encompassing all of the Community Justice Task Force and what they were concerned about, and I think it does do that. I just want to verify it. Since some of the recommendations have been already implemented, I'm really curious if there are any metrics right now, any sort of cookie crumbs that you can provide that show that, yes, we're actually reducing our jail population, because I think that would be a good encourager to this board, that the recommendations in the study has been a very positive and fruitful experience thus far. So any metrics that you can provide at this point?
It's going to make
Maybe
you
not?
crazy because of that sentence, that phrase in the sentence that said reduce the jail population. The jail population is not really reduced yet. But there are indicators within the matrix, or metrics, as you put it, the measures of flow, that suggest that there's been real improvements and that there will be reductions in the population. Is that a fair statement, Alan? So Alan Jones has been collecting data, different kind of data, recommended by our report for just a bit now, and there's actually an example of it in the report in the back, in the appendix. You can take a look at it, and if you're into metrics, you may see the hope that I have that over the next year there'll be a decrease in the pressure, population pressure on not just the jail but the whole system. But it isn't simple, and it isn't all of a sudden. It isn't a light switch. It isn't one simple change that creates emptiness in the jail and lowering of your budgets. It's complicated. There are a lot of things that need to be done. There's a lot of priorities that need to be addressed. And frankly, I think your Criminal Justice Executive Council, which is one of the recommendations we made, but we made it after it was already in place and it's changed a little bit and it's been modified, is going to have a lot of responsibility for setting priorities and making changes that haven't happened yet. And they're not a group that you can control. They're not a group that I can control. They're a group of elected, independent, constitutional officers. And the ones that aren't are coming from the cities or the university or other places where you can't really have a huge impact on them because they have their own constituency.
Okay. One follow-up, if you don't mind. In the proposal, you indicated it tonight with respect to converting the downtown jail into a U.S. governmental jail or facility. You recommended a net new hire of employee at $50K, $50,000 per year. I assume you've made this recommendation in the past with other institutions or counties our size. What sort of incentive or what sort of response have you seen from the U.S. government when this has been recommended in the past? Like, what sort of cash flow do we anticipate to see
Well,
if we do hire this
you're
person?
mixing two things up. It's, first of all, it's my perhaps even harebrained idea that you could get the feds to remodel the old downtown jail and make it into a federal holding facility. It wouldn't change your jail, your budget, your criminal justice system a bit. It would just take a building off your hands and probably give you some new jobs in the community and a budget item off your agenda that is to upkeep that terrible old jail, because it's a jail that's needed by the feds if they wanted to put the money into it. Will that happen? I don't know. I have no idea. Has anybody even asked the U.S. Marshal's Office? I don't think so. But that's not to be confused with the recommendation of a reentry coordinator. That $50,000 position you were talking about.
Yes, and I did confuse the issue.
Okay.
So my apologies.
No,
But
no,
go ahead
but
and talk about this one, because that's what I really wanted to hit on.
Okay, but anyway, let me go with the question as you asked it, which is what would be the financial implications of creating a position like that? I think the financial implications would be a $500,000 grant from Second Chance money from the feds for reentry programming in your county. I don't think you should wait. I think you should spend some of your money right now doing reentry program planning and write a proposal with this new coordinator, which I hope would be your new assistant county administrator or some other position for the moment, to write some grants. Because you don't have very much grant money of the kind that I think you need, and reentry is one of the big ones. The Obama administration and the Department of Justice and the National Institute of Justice have put a bunch of money into reentry in this country. It's called Second Chance money. It's huge. It's billions. You don't have any. To my knowledge, you don't have any. And having a coordinator of reentry who will be writing grants and trying to coordinate community resources and put together the first steps in a reentry program, I think will get you more money, a lot more money. You're a perfect county to get reentry money, Second Chance money, but you don't have any. I was waiting for that. I wasn't sure. So is that an answer?
Yes, that's an answer. Thank you.
I think that's something we certainly need to explore.
Yeah.
We have a Regional Planning Commission does a lot of our grant writing, and a lot of grant writing for a number of different programs, and I certainly would look for your help and suggestion on which programs might be most reentry would be the first.
Reentry is the program that starts when somebody goes to jail for any kind of period of time, more than a few days or a week, as to what's going to happen when they get out. Otherwise, somebody gets left off at a bus stop with no change in their pocket. Their family may not even know they're coming home. There's no plans for employment. There's no plans for reintegration into the community, and the kind of pressures that result on a human in that circumstance are more than most people can handle, and they recidivate.
My question was more like, you have other counties that are already receiving monies in this area, which could help us by calling them or giving us some direction to calling and perhaps get over the hurdle of.
I think you want a free proposal.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad.
Send Champaign a free
Something
proposal.
like that.
I will do that.
Okay.
I'll send you the reentry program proposal that, got $1.6 million from Allegheny County. and
That's
you can
exactly what I
scale
was
it.
looking
I know
for.
what you're looking for. You're from New York. Luckily, so am I.
So are you, from my same neighborhood, too. James?
Cal, one of the conversations we've had in the past couple of months was our ability to charge local law enforcement agencies for the cost of booking. We apparently have limited capabilities. There's an agreement about that, but it doesn't seem to have any teeth. One of the things I'm curious about, though, have you seen in other areas, in all of your experience, whether a deterrent of, making the policing agencies have a higher cost in the process, does that help them fine-tune their policing strategies in the way that you suggest throughout here? But is that a mechanism that we should spend any time looking at? Because in one respect, we can do it from a very legitimate, this is our cost to book someone into the jail. We need more money from the delivering authority to cover that cost, because they're generating that work. But from another standpoint, you know, when the cost is higher, people tend to think harder about how they're spending that, when they're going to do that. I mean, just because it's shorter from Urbana to the jail shouldn't encourage them to drop people off more often. And if there's a cost associated with that, maybe that's another way to persuade them that their policing strategies need some review.
So the answer is yes.
Great.
I'll elaborate because I'm not good at one-word answers, but the answer is resoundingly yes. I do understand and want to tip my hat to the fact that you have a fabulous, fabulous sheriff, and he has relationships across the county with the city police chiefs. You as a county have relationships with the cities. There has been a history here that I'm easily able to ignore because I wasn't here when this history was created. I didn't make these agreements. And I'm up for change in your county. It's not my county. I think change is needed. But you're going to have to work out the politics of good relationships with the city and the city police departments and the city mayors and the city managers and the city councils to do this. But yes, in almost every place I go, you can show a high correlation between distance to the jail and the number of arrests that a police department makes to put into that jail. Further it is, fewer arrests. There's almost no exception. Such that if you are in, what the hell's the name of that city in Ventura County? Way out on the other end of the county, in Ventura County in California. I can't remember the name of it. But in that county, they don't even take felons to jail. They cite them in the field unless they are a clear and present danger of continuing to stab somebody. Literally.
Actually, it's in my bag.
Literally. So, you know, I don't think you want to go that far. You know, but having a price on the Bay Bridge got my wife out of her dad's old Mercedes, which she adores, into a little electric car. Why? Because otherwise the toll's going up to $8. Can't go over that bridge for $8 each time, etc. So do you want to ration a scarce resource called the jail in Champaign County? Gee, I think so. I think you want to. I think you want to bite the political bullets that are required to absorb that change in your relationships and in your finances. And, you know, I heard today from the cities that, you know, that would be a fairly provocative and outrageous overture towards them.
Very much so. Yes, we did.
Yeah, that wasn't something they were looking forward to at all. But obviously, if there's no cost to the marginal arrest, no extra cost to the marginal arrest, there's going to be a little bit more arresting than if there's a real cost to the marginal arrest. I don't need to tell you that. You told me with your question. So the question is, you know, how much to raise it, how to deal with it. I did try to make in the report, besides making this recommendation, I toned it down a little bit because I could tell you all had relationships with the city based on history and agreements, and you don't want to walk into somebody's house and discount those deals between mother and son and father and daughter. And all. These are deals. These are system deals. But still, I did try to say the most important thing you could do is start collecting absolute black and white data on this, so you know how many arrests are made by each agency, not just to that agency, but the city manager and the mayor and the city council know how many. And you know what happens to those arrests, because a great many of them, nothing happens. They're out. There's just a little bit of work at the front end of the system that wasn't needed to sort them out. They could be sorted out in the field in a great many cases. And then you find out that the city council says, well, how come we're doing all this? And the answer is like the fiddler on the roof, tradition. And then you stop doing quite as many, and the jail isn't as crowded. And you aren't between a rock and a hard place that y'all are sitting in here today, trying to figure out how to squeeze and make some programs in a jail that still hasn't really emptied. But I think the study, the study says from the very beginning, and, it's very difficult, it's a complicated study. It's a whole big waterfront that it covers. It's not just a study of one thing. It's a study of, 8 or 10 agencies, 4 or 5 major stages, a long period of time from arrest to disposition. It's a study of a lot of that. It's a demand study, complicated, sophisticated demand study. But one of the simplistic findings you can't get around is too many people in jail. Too many people being arrested and put in the jail. What does the word too many mean? Different things to different people. I'm sure there are people sitting in this room who say, bull. More should be in the jail, not fewer. More. How come we can't afford to build more jails so that we can put them all in there? I'll bet you there's people in this room thinking that thought. And there are a few offenders in the jail that I'd be the first one to say more of them should be in there. It's crime and punishment. People wrote books about it, right? But you need to sort out how you want to use a jail, how much jail you want to have. And I think one of the ways to sort it out is to put a price and a rationing system on the door so that it isn't, y'all come. But it's more like $88 and you can bring them in instead of 22. That would solve 90% of your problems right there.
So if I could follow up, would it be
Go ahead, Jim.
simple to say, because I think it bears re-saying, that the most impact that we can have on keeping people out of jail who shouldn't be in jail is focusing on policing standards?
No. No, because
Why is that not the case? Because that's at the beginning of the process. If you can squelch it there.
It demonizes
I'm not
the
demonizing the police.
No, it does.
I'm talking about process.
Well, from a process point of view, it would be nice if this community had a better definition of who it wanted to put in cages. Once that definition was there, the pressure on the police to arrest anybody who's kicking a garbage can and waking up your neighbor who calls the cops and asks them to come out and do something about this guy who's disrupting my sleep, would change a bit. A little bit is all you need to change. Right now, your police trying to do everything for everybody, and it's very hard for them to ignore constituencies asking for a police response. How do you feel when somebody comes out to your neighborhood, kicks the garbage can, breaks a few windows, and creates enough of a ruckus that you call the cops and they don't take anybody to jail? How do you feel?
Hasn't happened, so I can't tell you.
Okay, well, I live in a college neighborhood, and let me tell you how it feels. It feels like the cops aren't worth a damn, and they get all this money, and I'm paying all these taxes, and nothing happened. It's Friday night. By tomorrow night, it'll be Saturday night. It'll happen all over again. How come they didn't arrest them? Then I think, well, wait a minute. Is jail the solution to that loud garbage can? Or is the police response the solution, and then intelligent decisions based on rationing of scarce resources, booking fee? A lecture and a threat and a field interrogation card so I have a record of the guy who kicked the garbage can? Or is it jail? And it's just a little shade that needs to happen here for the system to be in much better balance and for you to have enough resources to sort of make hay in the sunshine.
Aaron?
Yes, thank you. Al, I guess in response to Quiz's question, I believe it wasn't too many meetings ago that Mr. Walsh informed us that booking fee, by state law, the cities can say, stick it, we're not paying you anything, and you have to book them no matter what.
Well,
So if that's the state law, we say, we're going to pay you, we want you to pay us $200 an inmate, and that way we're going to cut it way down. They could go the other way and say, we're going to pay you nothing, and we're going to send you anybody and everybody, and you book them.
You know,
So how do you respond to that?
I can't respond to that because I didn't do legal research on that, and I'm not sure of that. I don't believe that it's true that you can't charge a booking fee based on your cost, but there may be law that says you can't.
That's a question to me that is unfortunately my opinion. We have to take their prisoners if they are charged with state offenses, and we can't charge them.
Anything.
Correct.
Even,
Right now, Cal, they pay us because of an old agreement with my predecessor for literally paper copies of fingerprints, paper copies of photos, things that we really don't need anymore because it's all electronic. But that was for the copy. That was again years ago. Yeah, would you give the sheriff a microphone if he wants to respond, please? Oh, well. What's that? State, it's state. It's state, it's not local, it's not county or city?
90% of the arrests are on state criminal charges, domestic battery, robbery, things of that sort. Now, there are city ordinance charges. On the state charges, in my mind, it is clear, if they say, we are not paying you, sheriff, here is your prisoner, and don't bother sending us the $22 bill because you're just wasting a stamp, I think I don't believe there's any legal choice. I have to take them. If our judges issue an arrest warrant based upon an ordinance violation, there is either case law or an attorney general's opinion, again saying, sheriff, you cannot charge the cities. On that issue, Madam State's Attorney's assistants have looked because we want to try to use that as a lever with the cities and city ordinances to say, all right, we'll take your prisoners, but you pay us. And the opinion, and I agree, it's right, is we can't do that. I don't know if Madam State's Attorney wants to comment.
well, I don't blame Madam State's Attorney at all for not commenting. This is a can of worms. But I just think that a booking fee is needed. And you got to have some cost to the fact that there are people that don't have to go to jail to get arrested. You've got to have some cost. That cost has got to go up through the city manager's office, and the city manager's got to be able to talk to the police chief and say, well, how come so many of these people that we're arresting don't stay in jail? Why are they going to begin with? See? So I don't know how to solve this one, but a booking fee is a very ubiquitous, very common feature of criminal justice systems everywhere in the country.
There are a lot of things that are state mandates we do that we have no control over. Josh?
And maybe this is a little off to talk about, but in my mind, considering the fact that, Patsy has brought up the idea of a quarter-cent raise in the public safety sales tax, which I am not for. But you consider the fact that the cities of Urbana and Champaign have both raised their sales tax a quarter-cent in the last 6 months or so to squeeze that public safety opportunity out from the county, perhaps entering into some sort of good faith negotiation with the cities to raise that booking fee, because we've even heard from the city of Champaign they're not sure how they're going to spend all that money yet. Considering the money that this county board and our county officials spend on this justice study, on moving forward with pretrial, and considering that Champaign and Urbana are our two largest clients in this county for justice, perhaps they could find a way to be responsible community citizens as well and shoulder some of the burden of dealing with this.
Let's look at it also the other way. If this thing is done correctly, which starts off with getting everybody around a table, the way you described it, I certainly am all for tables, and round tables at that, animated by data about the actual incidents of arrests geographically and what happens to these arrests, which I think this report gives you a foundation for. It's pretty thorough in that regard. Then it isn't a matter necessarily of them paying more money for booking fees. It's a matter of them paying a higher booking fee for fewer arrests. Same amount of money in the end. You don't know how that's going to play out. But getting some sort of rationing system on the jail, particularly if you can do it with agreement of the cities, so that they're at least willing to look at the data about who they put in, for what, and how long they stay. And don't forget, this is a very important feature of this thing. Again, I'm not going to be around to help you guys deal with this, but if I were, first thing I'd say to the city is, you know, every time you put somebody in the jail that's out fast and really doesn't play out through the criminal justice system, ergo didn't need to be in there, every time you do that, you also take somebody off Commissioner James's beat. When he wants to call about that garbage can, ain't nobody there to respond. Because what are they doing? They're trucking some other guy to the jail. And it takes 3 or 4 hours to take somebody to the jail and hook them up and get them in. And time you take your break and get back to your beat, it's a half a day. And then if you really want to get after it, there's a lot of cases that don't just get right out, but get out 3 or 4 days later after other costs begin to accumulate in the courts and the public defender and the prosecutor's office. That's why I've been so big on this issue of risk assessments, winnowing out what's really important for people who are afraid for their personal safety. That's the big ticket item. And those kinds of behaviors that the criminal justice system can't afford to use a cage for and process so many people for. You don't have the money.
Okay, hopefully that's questions from the board, and we can move on. Okay. The next is I'm going to give you some ground rules. There will be a public comment and question and answer with Dr. Kalmanoff. I'm not going to hold everyone to a 5-minute limit. This is an important subject, and I would like your comments and your questions to be answered, hopefully in full. But I will hold you to a shorter time period, than a little bit longer than 5 minutes, but I don't want to have a half-hour recitation of what we've already been discussing over these months and almost a year now. So what I'd like to do is, those of you that would like to speak to this issue, there is a numbering system in the back. If you decide that you want to speak, there's a number there. Some of you already have their numbers. I will call the number as we go along. And please try and keep it concise. Dr. Kalmanoff has explained an awful lot to us tonight, and the report, if you've hopefully read it, will give you some answers. So let's start with, what's that, Cal?
I was wondering if I could speak to one other issue.
Sure, absolutely.
Forgive me for doing this, but I have had only 2 comments about the report. I'm quite surprised at that, actually. I've had one comment from a board member who caught an egregious typo. And I have to fix that. And it'll be an errata sheet. And then I've had one comment from a member of the community, and I want to speak to that one so that I can deal with that one right up front. The comment was made that, a series of comments were made about this Criminal Justice Advisory Board recommendation that was quite controversial in the draft report. And there was a lot of discussion about it at the last series of public hearings. And I need to just clarify the facts so that we talk about what was, what is, and what may be. There was, per Judge DeFonis's desires, the beginning of a Criminal Justice Advisory Board. It occurred 3 years ago, Dan?
Probably started back in 2003, 2004, when our numbers went up. Then we called it Jail Overcrowding Committee, but it's the same thing, and we meet periodically.
Okay, so the numbers in the jail went up. Somebody said something, that probably was Dan, to Judge DeFonis. He pulled together the public defender, the prosecutor, himself, probation, and said, let's look at this system and look at the numbers. And immediately changes began to occur in the processing of inmates, which reduced the crowding over time and has maintained the lack of real serious crowding in your jail ever since. You don't have serious crowding. You have problems with the right space for the right people. But you have empty beds. And to the general public, that may sound like a waste of beds, but it isn't easy to put 2 crazy people in a 2-man cell. Has to be a single cell, so you'll lose a bed. And just use that to understand why you can have plenty of beds, but not enough. The spaces are wrong, the allocations are wrong, and classification is very important to getting them right. In any event, that informal group that Judge DeFanis started fit perfectly with something that swept the nation called the Criminal Justice Advisory Board. Most counties now have that. It's considered best practice. It's a board of all the key constitutional officers, independent constitutional officers that run the criminal justice system. And it's supposed to look at the data that the system can spit forth about flow and demand and manage it, much as a water board would manage a water system, to keep it from flooding or drying up, so to speak. Manage the flow, manage programs, money, coordination, look for ways to save, look for ways to lower, look for ways to speed. And it's been in place all along. Our draft report said it ought to be made more formal, and it ought to be used more aggressively, meet more frequently, and deal with more things. And as a response to that, the group that was meeting named itself the Criminal Justice Executive Council and has met more often and has done more things, including work with the police chiefs around this issue of citation in lieu of arrest, which is a major accomplishment. There were a lot of words spoken at the public hearing stage of this meeting or another meeting next to it. I forget which one it was most extensive at, about this Criminal Justice Advisory Board. There were people who said this ought to be a board accountable to community groups and to community interests to be able to have control or to have votes on this board. And anybody who's disappointed by the report not calling for that needs to understand that that just can't happen. You have independent elected constitutional officers, and they have the prerogative to run the system the way they want to. You can vote them out of office, but you can't say, hey, I'm coming in, we're going to budget your family together, you and I. No, that's your paycheck, and you have the authority in your family. And the criminal justice leadership in this county has the authority to do it the way they want to. And I don't know of anywhere in the country, anywhere in the 450 counties that I've worked in, where the criminal justice executive leadership, the presiding judge, the sheriff, the police chiefs, the prosecutor, the public defender, have said, oh, y'all come on in and tell us what to do. That's never happened to my knowledge. That's not the way it works. It's actually, I don't think, workable either. But the report does call for a major citizen input into that process in an organized fashion. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of people who still want to go with that idea that this ought to be accountable and controlled by the community. And it can only be done by elections or by using the very simple mechanism of this advisory group that I tried to set up in the report. I don't know if that's going to cut down the conversations that we're about to have or expand on them, but the attempt was to kind of narrow that particular issue down a bit.
Thank you, Cal. All right, let's start with number one, please. Please, when you get to the table, turn on your microphone. Please announce your name and address, and we'll go from there.
And if you have rotten fruit to throw, don't throw it at him. I'm the guy.
There's a button at the bottom of the, there you go. Excellent. And move that close to you, please.
Good evening. I'm Diane Zell. I'm the president of the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Champaign County. I represent hundreds of people throughout the county who live with mental illness and their loved ones. NAMI applauds the county board for seeking professional input and being deliberate in asking for public comments about the board's decision concerning the spending of public safety tax monies. NAMI echoes and amplifies 9 recommendations from the County Board Community Justice Task Force and Dr. Kalmanoff's consultant report. NAMI is heartened that the County Board is already in the process of developing a best practice pretrial program. So specifically, number one recommendation would be that we encourage the County Board to consider an assisted outpatient treatment as a mental health diversion treatment program for use with citizens with mental illness caught up repeatedly in the criminal justice system. This is a program started by E. Fuller Torrey. Number two, we urge the County Board to consider only local providers as you, quote, rebuild the mental health services model as the foundation for more cost-effective health care, end quote, as cited from the consultant report. Number three, NAMI implores you to allocate a greater percentage of the public safety tax monies to preventive social services as recommended in the local community task force report. The current 5% allocation is totally inadequate, especially in light of increased funding needs due to the imperiled nature of state funding, which is no surprise to anyone. Number four, NAMI supports adding special needs housing and committing funds to a 24/7 community resource center in order to reduce the use of the area's hospitals, emergency departments as primary care facilities. In accordance with this goal, a sobering center, quote unquote, needs to be developed. Number five, NAMI urges the County Board to seriously consider repurposing existing county buildings. For example, the old county nursing home, for community corrections such as the day reporting center, believed also mentioned in one of the reports, and for office space. Number six, NAMI applauds the recommendation that more monies be committed to crisis intervention training for all first responders in the county in order to divert those living with mental illness who also often overlap with the chronic offender population. Number seven, technology such as the Jail Data Link program, also mentioned in one of the reports, should be used by all stakeholders to share information to allow case management and improve treatment and treatment integration. This should reduce the chances for someone to slip through those cracks, as we too often hear from public media. Number eight, provisions under the Affordable Care Act should be used to access Medicaid for those with mental illness and or substance abuse issues, since they are so often uninsured. Number nine, NAMI encourages the board to allocate, quote, the best possible array of jail housing for mentally ill inmates who can't be safely housed with others, end quote, according to the consultant's report. Jail detention has repeatedly been shown to exacerbate mental illness symptoms. Mental health therapy during incarceration should be part of this, quote, best array of services, end quote, and it should, as should, continuation of already prescribed medications. It is dangerous to suddenly discontinue or change psychiatric medications. These 9 recommendations, when implemented, would have a huge impact on reducing recidivism, B, drastically reduce the percent of inmates who have a mental illness history, and C, save Champaign County taxpayers money. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Let me,
Sorry, I haven't called you up yet. Dr. Kalmanoff would like to respond, so I'll call the number.
you don't need to go back and sit down. I'm going to be quick. Everything you said is right on. It all comes out of the report that we just published, and it's all important. It's very, very important. I don't know if it sounded novel or different or brand new to anybody, but it was in the draft report and it's in this report. These are not huge, huge targets. These are a bunch of targets that add up to a huge target. So I thank you for your comment. Every one of those recommendations, every one of those 9 is in this report and considered to be very important. And not many of them are very expensive. They involve coordination and planning and prioritization.
Number 2, please.
Paul Muth in Urbana on Illinois Street. I just wanted to first off mention that there was this idea floated that nobody was looking at buildings, and I don't know whether it was the jail overcrowding committee. There was people that from this community who attended a variety of seminars about buildings. It was not done very openly, it seems to me. I don't know if that was by choice or just by happenstance, but I think there were some FOIAs to figure out what actually was going on, and apparently records weren't kept or something, I don't know. But the impression was that nobody was looking at buildings. People were looking at buildings very, very clearly at the beginning of this process. We've come a long way in the discourse about detention. The community is seized with the issue. The University YMCA has a forum called Rethinking Security Beyond Mass Incarceration, a whole series of discussants. It's been quite good. And I commend it to your attention. They have files, and it's on the radio the following Monday after the Friday that it takes place. And the community is seized with this issue, it seems to me. So we've come a long way from scared straight and super predator arguments, and I'm sure Kalmanoff probably was batting those down because they're so simplistic and ludicrous. But in this community, we've had a judge of some standing some years ago talk about the juvenile detention center needing to have the ambience of Menard.
Of
which
what?
is ambience of Menard, the level 3 penitentiary in Southern Illinois. And this is for detainees who aren't even necessarily going to be accused of a crime. They're just in a circumstance. And that was part of the discourse. The guy's still around. I'm not going to say his name. But you did try to deflect the arguments about the advisory board. I don't know why you would call it an advisory board. It's clearly a policy board. Advisory board implies that it would be people from the outside, you know, looking over your shoulder, which in a public circumstance, that's what the public should be doing. So I wouldn't call it advisory board. In your discourse, you also talked about, well, what did you recommend? You did say abandon the downtown jail, which I thought that was a curious turn of phrase, like last one out, turn out the light or something. But it seems to me that one of the things that I've just been paging through the document, in an earlier discussion, you said it's not too much of, you know, it's like 15 minutes from the courthouse to this satellite jail. I think that there should be some provision towards arraignment jails so that the very much overworked and understaffed juvenile public defenders and even people that can afford a lawyer don't have to run across town. I don't know if how easily that is to be done, but arraignment cells seems like a good idea to have them proximate to the. There was some language about how people do not like to do the video conferencing, and I think that's true. I think person to person is a lot better, and I don't know if there's any provision for that. I think repurposing this building and moving the meetings to downtown. I'm all in favor of downtowns, and people say, well, there's no parking downtown. Well, there wasn't much parking here today because of all the soccer playoffs, but or whatever's going on out there. I just think that having a meeting space, and this old school could be repurposed towards being partially jail and actually having some maybe classes, short courses. There's some attempt from the community to have reading classes and that sort of thing in the jails here, and I think that's a great idea, and that's, again, reflects how much people are seized with this this idea of what gives us security in the community, whether it's throwing people in jail right away without the discretion that Dr. Kalmanoff suggests. And that's all I have right now, I think, and thank you for your attention.
Appreciate it. You want to respond?
I'm going to try to be quick with all these responses. First of all, there is video arraignment, and I agree with you that there ought to be judges out at the jail doing arraignments. I don't think you're going to get it, because I don't think the judges are going to go there. The legal community is not going to do that, but I think it should be done. Second, the advisory board, the word advisory is meant to indicate that the state attorney who's elected will advise the sheriff who's elected, will advise the judge who was elected and appointed, et cetera. It wasn't meant to indicate ever by me, because the word didn't come from me, that it's the community that's going to tell the criminal justice leadership what to do. But I did provide for advisory committee to the executive council in the report. Last, when you said that they were talking about buildings at the beginning, it was the sheriff himself who asked the National Institute of Corrections to come in. And it was the Pony program, if I'm not mistaken, planning for the opening of new institutions. It's very easy to misunderstand what that program is about, but I have evaluated that program for the U.S. Congress, taught in that program, and I'm very familiar with it. And that is a program that pretty much lays out to do a study like this first before you think about building. That's what the program was that the sheriff was talking about. That's what those groups and seminars were about. That's what the trip to Boulder was about. Certainly some people came home and said building. Certainly. Because some people look at a problem with the car and they say tires will take care of it, while other people say, no, it's a carburetor. And somebody else says, no, people will disagree about what the problems are. Criminal justice is very complex. But they were talking about buildings. The sheriff asked them in. And yet their approach is what's called total systems planning, which is what I think our report is.
Thank you, Cal. Number 3, please.
Good evening, everybody. Aaron Ammons, 1108 North Busey. There's a lot of stuff to try to comment on, but I guess we'll have a little bit of your time tomorrow, Mr. Kalmanoff. So all the stuff, all the rotten fruit, I'll throw it tomorrow instead of, I'm just thought I can get a laugh out of you tonight, right? All right, so we have a couple of things that I would like to share that deal with priorities and even prerogative. I'd like to start my comments or preface my comments with a brief story about something I heard today about the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa. There was a lady whose husband and son was killed by this gentleman, brutally killed, and it was very traumatic for her. During the Truth and Reconciliation process, she was asked, what would you like to see happen? And she said, I want you, since you took my husband and you took my son from me and left me alone, I want you to have to visit me every day and to be my companion. Now, I know 95 or 99% of the people in this room cannot even fathom such a thought. It blew my mind, and it moved me to a different place. So when we talk about rethinking the concepts of justice, why do we always come to the conclusion that it has to mean punishment, vengeance, incarceration, as if we cannot move beyond that, we're trapped within that thought process? I'm not saying that I don't think there are individuals who are, I don't want to say it, but hell-bent on committing some sort of destruction, and there may need to be a place for those people. But I just thought I'd preface my comments with that. Now, what we have experienced over the years in dealing with this quarter-cent sales tax, for instance, is a priority on buildings, Stan. 95% of the money for years after year after year after year has gone towards basically building and maintaining buildings. So we have spent almost all of our time focusing on buildings and very, very little time on programs and addressing the issues that lead people into those buildings. So I think we should we should think about that if we really want to be fair and objective in this conversation. One of the things that we want to say that we absolutely support reentry. We do see the value in reentry, and we hope to see something like that. We just wanted to make sure that we let everyone know that we really appreciated that, Mr. Kalmanoff, and we think there's some movement on the board and a direction to try to get that implemented. That's something that we really think is important and that we would appreciate to see in the community. The one concern that I have as the president of CWC, of Citizens with Conviction, is that as we fight on a regular basis for our humanity and our dignity and not to be labeled and to be stigmatized, is that we see from program after program after program, in most instances, there's an individual who has not felt the direct brunt of that, who's in charge of running the facility, who's in charge of running the program, as opposed to someone who knows directly what that impact is like and having their input or even running that particular program. So I would have liked to have seen if there's an assistant or someone who's going to be Deb's assistant. I don't know how we would work that out, but I would like to see space carved out for an individual who understands firsthand what that's like to create opportunities for a citizen who has a conviction. The other thing I want us to be clear about is that we like the ideas of using the downtown facility for something, but we are completely opposed to using it for a federal holding facility. The primary reason for that would be for us is that we are under the logical conclusion that it would be used for ICE. It would be used for holding of quote-unquote illegal immigrants. And we are against that, of the facility being used for that reason. If there's some other creative way that the feds would like to use it, we agree with getting federal grant money and relieving the pressure on the county. We're not trying to be unreasonable, but we would want to explore some more creative ideas and ways of using the downtown facility as opposed to using it as a federal holding facility. The pretrial mechanism is one thing that's very interesting to me. I have a question and then a comment. When we talk about beds, and you said no new beds, are we talking about adding the beds at the downtown jail with the satellite jail, which means that there's technically no new beds, or are you talking about a decrease in the overall number of beds?
It's not a simple answer. It has to do with what happens in the facility changes that are being talked about by the sheriff to try to make do with what he's got, and then the changes in the system that the report calls for, and to see how it plays out. And if it doesn't play out, the sheriff is going to be correct in asking for some more space and different beds. But I've used the expression no more net new beds. You have what, 350 total?
308 or 313, depending on
Yeah.
how you count.
You don't need that many. But you got 240 inmates right now, so you need that many until you can get the population down. So it's a complicated question you ask, but I'd like to come back to some of the things you said in a minute, so let me
Okay.
stop now.
And I think that it's difficult for us, but I think we understand that as you talk to Mr. McGuire, that some of the things that have been implemented already need a chance to start to have its impact before you can actually make a more accurate assessment of some of those things. And I think we can appreciate that. The other thing is about the pretrial mechanism. In particular, why would this particular aspect of this lead to building if we're already using the sort of where the police are doing the in lieu of citations and stuff? I wanted you to be a little more specific about what number or what percentage you think the in lieu of would decrease the population, and what number you think, I thought you said about 30 to 40 people on the pretrial piece, but why is that particular mechanism so important, and why would the lack of that implementation lead to, in your opinion, more building?
Well, when a police officer sees somebody on the street commit a crime, or it's reported to him that somebody has committed a crime, the police officer probably should take action, at least to look into what happened, And if the police officer finds out that something happened that was a crime, it's the police officer's discretion to file a crime report and push that person into the system, or not. And my own experience, having played both sides of every game there is, having been a civil rights attorney, been with a police department swing shift for 2 years, done a lot of things, is that discretion right there is very valuable, because you don't want a machine to say anybody commits a crime goes to jail. You want a human being to say, well, what kind of crime was it? What was the damage? What's the likelihood of it continuing? Who did it? Who got hurt? And make a decision that's based on discretion. However, there's only so much discretion you can have out there at 3 in the morning in the dark. And so more people are going to go to jail initially from that discretion than necessarily might need to be in jail pre-trial with the light of day. At the light of day, I find out that this guy who gave me so much trouble last night actually has a job, actually has lived in this community even though he doesn't own a home for 23 years. Actually is well known to a lot of people in the community, including a local minister who says he would check on him every day to make sure he showed up at court. And between an OR instrument, which is a risk assessment instrument that identifies those facts, and whatever other little mechanisms we can add, like the minister or the neighbor or whatever, we cut them loose on OR because there's no reason to have that person sit in jail. And we know once the person starts to sit, if they don't have the money, they can sit a while.
Yes, indeed.
And maybe a long time. And they may even lose their job because of that, sitting in jail for a long time. Now, it doesn't have to happen very often to be hideously expensive for this community to have that happen. If the person is not a danger to others or a danger to not appear. So there's 2 cuts we take. The first cut is the citation in lieu of arrest cut. I arrest you unless, no, the way the state law, this is state law, the way the state law says, if you're a misdemeanor, I ticket you, but I don't transport you to jail unless there's a danger of a continuing offense. I'm going to keep on hitting the guy as soon as you let go of my arm. There's a danger to a case that's in progress. I'm going to destroy the evidence as soon as I get in the house. There's a danger to some witness to a case. There's a failure to identify, or there's a high likelihood the guy won't show up in court. If none of those things are the case, I have to cite him, is what the state law suggests. But if I don't know enough about the person in the dark at 3 in the morning, you're going to go to jail in a close call, and that's what happens. And then you need an OR program, a pretrial release program of some sort, to take that second cut. And my estimate of 30 or 40 is nothing more than an estimate. It's a very complicated system. And you can't just predict from past profiles and classification exercises in our study, of which there are many, what will happen when the Virginia system is put into effect here, which is the system that has some credibility in your prosecutor's office and in your judge's offices.
I think that was all I had. There's a lot of stuff, but I won't try to just keep going back into.
Let me say 2 or 3 quick things to what you said earlier. When you talked about that lady going, getting the murderer going to visit that lady every day, that's restorative justice. And I'm not trying to advocate for that particular solution because I think you were right. Everybody in this room would go, whoa, I saw it. You saw it. You meant for it to happen. It is restorative justice, but it isn't something that you can wave a magic wand and make it start to happen. It's difficult. But using the concept of restorative justice is something that will really do you all a lot of good. Trying to build it into your programs, build it into your sanctions, build it into your system, your belief system. So I'm with you on that one. It's just easier to say it in here with dramatic effect than it is to implement it. Very hard to implement it. The issue of an ex-offender running a reentry program, I wouldn't go for the assistant director of the reentry program. I'd say an ex-offender should be the director of the reentry program. without question, because there's tons and tons of evidence that says a talented ex-offender who's been through the process can run, manage, plan, execute, implement a jail or a prison reentry program better than somebody who hasn't, with all the degrees and all the rest of it. So I'm totally with you on that one. You can't just bring in somebody who used to run the corporation yard and was very good at it, or somebody who used to run a building permit program and who was very good at it, and say, oh, run the ex-offender. It's not that kind of thing. It needs to be an ex-offender.
Just lastly, to all of the board members that,
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
oh, okay, go ahead.
One more quick thing. I understand that your fear that rehabbing the old jail as a federal pretrial holding facility, which is what I've suggested but not developed, because I didn't have the way to do it. I couldn't go on behalf of you guys to the U.S. Marshal and say, hey, would you fix up this building, get a grant? I couldn't do that. I'm a consultant. But it was never for general purpose federal holding. It was for pretrial holding, and I think you have reason to fear it being used for ICE. And that's a very controversial issue, and I won't take a position on it because I don't live here. But it's not quite all or nothing there.
Okay. Again, to the board members and to all of us who are here, citizens who've been active on this issue for a long time and various other issues, it is my belief that we've moved to a space collectively where the citizen input, we're beginning to feel as though this input is being taken serious. And we've had situations like this in the past in dealing with your friends in the cities of Champaign or Urbana, but in particular Champaign, where it took a while for some things to be implemented. When we've had conversations where we went before them and made recommendations. And so we're confidently looking forward to seeing an actual implementation of some of the things that we've recommended, and that the citizen input is being valued in a way that we feel like it should be when we accept the role of offering that type of input. Because all of you are citizens before you become elected officials, and you're still citizens as elected officials. So I just appreciate the time and the consideration that's been put into this, and I think that this whole situation has moved us to a different space, and I hope that we can build from there. So thank you for your time.
Number 4, please.
Hello. My name is Julie Watkins. I live at 805 East Green Street in Urbana, and I was wanting to speak on priorities and sort of put a, oh, and I'm losing the word. I think it's important, the citizen input that people keep coming back to. When you're talking about risk assessment and the other aspects that you've been doing there, one thing that I only heard briefly discussed is the whole thing about the disparity and systemic discrimination that has gotten into the system. A lot of times when I'm talking to people about statistics, their eyes kind of roll, but it's there are a lot of statistics showing that the same behavior across a race spectrum are disproportionately ticketed, arrested, incarcerated here and nationally. And if it's minorities or poor people, there's been a series of cases that have gone upwards toward the Supreme Court, and they've basically said that you can't use statistics as proof. It isn't accepted as evidence. So that puts a real strong motivation for people locally to say, we've got to fix it here locally, because we don't have a national second chance to take care of it. We have to take care of it locally. And we just see this from past history. So I want to make sure when we're talking about programs and stuff like that, that would have a great deal of influence and help for us feeling like people are being treated fairly, because a lot of people don't trust a system that has statistically been proven to be unfair. So that's why people fill up, I believe that's why people fill up the rooms and say, we want to take care of this locally. And I wanted to add my voice to that. And that's all.
We've been at this for 2 hours now. I think a short break will be in order. So we're going to take about a 7-minute break and then come back so we can hear all the public. Thank you. All right, let's come back to order, please. Thank you. All right, we were on number 5, if I think that's the number. With number 5, please step to the desk. That's number 5 right there.
Somebody's going to say bingo one of these moments.
Yeah.
Exactly.
B5.
My lucky number. Okay. Danielle Chenoweth, 412 West Illinois Street in Urbana, just down the road. So there's a number of forums this week. I'm going to actually save a lot of my questions for some of the other forums where we have a little bit more time. So I just want to have a few big picture comments and then just a couple of comments to the county board specifically about some of the recommendations. So first off, I feel really heartened by this process. I feel like I've worked on national legislation, I've worked on state legislation, and obviously I've worked in local government for a while, and I just feel like local government is actually where we can have these conversations and where we can actually have a collaborative approach, because ultimately I think what we understand is that we're each other's neighbors. And so I can't say the same, I can't throw the same kind of mud, I can't, I can't have the same kind of intense warlike antagonism that you can kind of have working on federal issues when you're talking locally. And so I feel like what I've watched as I've watched this process over the last year and a half, I've really watched us begin to think together instead of kind of starting out with, we're going to build a $22 million jail, and the sheriff says it's going to happen, and this is what it's needed. And honestly, from his perspective, that made the most sense because that's where he sits, right? But ultimately, it's us who pay for it. So bringing us to the table and us being able to have this conversation has been so important. And actually doing due diligence, having a community justice task force, having a consultant come in who can give big picture perspective. I just want to say, first off, I think that the process is working and that I feel like from this side of the table, we feel more included in the process. So I think, and with that comes, we have shared goals here. So we want less crime, we want equality under the law, and we don't want to have to necessarily throw a bunch of money in a pit or in a building that we don't need. So those are all kind of shared premises, and the question is, how do we get there? And Dr. Kamenov's report has helped to get us there. So you asked for an assessment of facilities. That's where this started. But you actually got a reframing of the criminal justice system. And I think part of that has to do with actually a national conversation that's happening right now about decarceration. And if you look clearly at the statistics of mass incarceration over the last 30 years, you can see something has happened. And I think us locally, each community is waking up to that reality. So I'm a professional consultant. That's my day job. And the best consultants actually hold a mirror up to you and help you to see yourself in a different way and to see opportunities and alternatives you didn't see before. So in that way, I feel like, although I don't agree with every piece of the report, I feel like it's done a good job. I think the biggest takeaway from this report is we can jail fewer people. And if you look at the statistics, like no one around this table can argue against that because we actually have the stats now. We didn't before. I didn't have those stats a year and a half ago. I didn't know that out of 266 people in the jail, 162 were nonviolent offenses 3 Saturdays ago. Thanks to the research, the Planners Network on campus and some of the numbers that you pulled, we can see now, okay, now we know who's in the jail, why they're in the jail, and whether or not they need to stay there. So I think that is the takeaway. And so I don't think the conversation anymore can be what facilities we need. It's like that conversation's over as the only conversation on the table. It is now, we are jailing folks who don't need to be there. Let's wake up to this reality and let's do the right thing. So I think you actually have an easy job because you get to save lives and families and you get to save money. And sometimes those two things don't go together. But this is actually one of those easy moments in governance where you get to put these two together. Okay, so I want to talk a few specifics and then I'll get off the stand and let other folks speak. I support and CPJ, CU Citizens for Peace and Justice. We broke up this 200-page document, and each of us read a different section in pairs, and we had meetings, and we've talked about it, we've engaged with the report. We support the idea of an interim solution of the downtown jail being a minimum security facility. May not be a long-term solution, may not even be necessary long-term. So that came out of this report. We support the 70 minimum security beds in the nursing home. That's a great opportunity for use of a facility, and I think you should take that seriously. And of course, reentry first and foremost, reclassification, mental health. These are the things we've been talking about for a while. I would say at this point, the public is expecting movement on these pieces, and you have some clear direction. I want to talk about a little bit the few things we won't support. And this is where antagonism raises its head. I personally, I'm ready to quit my job and keep one of these things from happening, which is leasing the downtown jail to the feds, allowing that to become an immigrant detention center. You may see dollar signs behind that proposal. You might as well take that proposal off the table because we will fight you. We will fight you on that. It's totally unnecessary. It's not what we want to see in this community. That's a kind of game on situation. Second, I think doing a jail building project before addressing the fact that you're jailing a lot of people who don't belong there makes no sense. So the information before you and the facts are very clear in this regard. And so I don't, with all due respect, Stan, I don't really see, to me, it's actually pretty clear. He may not put dollar figures next to every piece, but essentially what he's saying and what this report is saying is do everything you can to bring the numbers down. You can actually see how you can do that. Go ahead and invest in some of those programs and then see where you're at. Use the downtown jail as a minimum security facility. Move women out of that jail, et cetera, so that and basically let's reassess in a couple of years. That is the conservative approach. The conservative approach is we're not going to throw money at this problem. The conservative approach is, and we're going to build then an empty jail for the future, right? That's the boondoggle that we want to avoid. The conservative approach is let's invest in people because we've invested far enough in facilities. Let's see what that investment bears, and then let's look at what our facilities need. So honestly, if facilities need, I feel like that conversation is 3 years down the line, 4 years down the line. The conversation right now is programs. You put the programs in place that should have been there all along. You see what the results are, and then you move forward. I will say we support, we insist on at least 30% of the public safety sales tax for programs. And I want to make a caveat as someone who funded a lot of programs on city council. We're not asking you to just fund programs so that people will shut up and go away, because there are a lot of programs that don't work, okay? So one of the things we're asking you to do is to actually invest in results-driven programs, not just any programs, but those that keep people out of jail. So we expect you, and I didn't think we did a good job of this on city council actually, is to evaluate the programs that you invest in, hold them to a high standard. Don't just fund the people you know. Don't just fund the people who are here, but you might need to create new programs. You might want to create competition in programs, right? So that people step up and there's a higher standard for some of these programs. Because sometimes with social service programming, the standard is not high enough, in my opinion, okay? So, and I'll just leave you with this piece. The CJEP, what is it? I can never remember what that stands for. It's the CJEP, the group of folks who we can't attend their meetings. That group, okay? To me, that section feels like it's going backwards in time, because we're here at the table, we're having this conversation. We have moved mountains together over the last year, and so to bring that conversation into a private room, behind closed doors, where the media can't be there to see and we, the public, can't be there to see, and to have that conversation, that is a move backwards, and we don't support that. Big picture, two big picture takeaways, and then I promise I really will be quiet. The first is this is really, I ask you to remember throughout this conversation that we're actually talking about people. That's the most important piece, is I really ask you to not be bureaucrats. It's really easy to have spreadsheets and to talk numbers, and even in this conversation, what's painful is to kind of talk like people are cattle or objects or money-saving devices, and that they're not people. And so a lot of us work, okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. A lot of us work in the jail, we meet with folks. There are people, these are neighbors, these are people in our community. They have done stupid things. They have done things out of desperation. They have done things out of addiction, poverty. They have mental health issues. And actually, a lot of us have those issues too. We have different issues, but we have more money to throw at the problems, right? So I just want us to remember that we're talking about people, and that when someone is in a cage, and I appreciate that phrase because that's what we're talking about, they are separated from their kids and their families and their community. And that actually creates a damage. And the damage I'm most interested in is what it does to kids when you put someone in jail who doesn't really need to be there, and that kid becomes acclimated to jail as part of their natural environment. We do not want our children to know that, oh, that's what happens to people. My dad or my mom goes to jail. So I want you to, I applaud the women in jail section. I appreciate that. I want you to take that into consideration seriously and really think about keeping families whole. That's all. Thank you.
Well, a very interesting series of comments, and I appreciate each and every one of them.
Rachel has...
I just wanted to make a quick comment because, as the person said, and I think if you said before, that we've come a really long way from a year ago and moved mountains. But as much criticism as we might have, including myself, about some things in your report, I don't think any of that could have been possible without Cal. So I think he deserves huge amounts of credits, and you don't need to answer that. He deserves huge amounts of credits, and I don't think, as much as the public's participation saw pushed a lot, I did not envision that anybody could have been where we're at now without him. So I just wanted to give him that credit. And please don't respond.
I do. I'm
Oh,
going
you
to
have
respond.
Okay,
You can't tell me not to respond to that. First of all, thank you for that, and I appreciate it. Second of all, I think that the real engine, in spite of one of the things the last speaker said, the real engine for the openness that allowed this board to grab a hold of these issues and at least start is your sheriff. Because your sheriff is a unique individual, even though it looks to you, a lot of the folks at the beginning of this thing looked to you like he wants a big new jail. That's just not true. You know, he wants beds that work to keep people safe. And I think he'd be real happy with 150 if he could only have 150 inmates. Absolutely. And so there is a lot of reason to be very hopeful, and I appreciate your comment, but I need to pass it along because it's really due to him. And I want to say to you, the board, I don't want to have this be a little kiss-ass session right now, but, you know, the board went ahead and did a study having no idea what would be dug up, having no idea who you'd have to take on and deal with. So my hats are off to you, too.
Thank you. Number 6, please.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Kalmanoff, members of the board. I'm Sophia Lewis, 2000 block of Varder Street in Urbana, and I'm the contact person for the Women in the Jail work group of the Champaign-Urbana Center for Peace and Justice. You asked a question, is that Keebler? I'm sorry. But I'm going to speak to him based off something that you made a question to him about, and that was whether or not the report had been of the Community Justice Task Force had been fully integrated into the final preparations of Dr. Kalmanoff in his final report. And to that, Ms. Bergson said that no, it had not, because of issues that had been left out related to women. And Dr. Kalmanoff was very receptive to the Women in the Jail work group. Of course, as I mentioned last time, he did meet with us, and he included a lot of our concerns and recommendations. They're reflected both in the initial draft report as well as they are in the final recommendations for the final report. But there was still more because the Women in the Jail work group was only formed in mid-March of this year. And so as a consequence, we only had a limited amount of time to do a lot of the researching that we needed to do. It wasn't until after the Community Justice Task Force completed its meetings that we FOIA'd some very important information, including how long it had been since parent-child contact visits had been eliminated in the jails. We finally did find out that information, and it has been since January 14th of 2010. So that's 3.5 years plus of nurturing opportunities missed between parents and their children in the jails. So, and we only had an opportunity as Women in the Jail work group to meet with the Community Justice Task Force during the last 3 of the several meetings that they had between the time they reconvened late last year and wrapped up, you know, just before they gave their response report a few months ago. And so a lot of what we were able to do was, you know, a lot late, but we did get some things in that were very critical. We did manage to take your advice, Dr. Kalmanoff, and meet with people. We met with the sheriff after we did that for you, and he's very amenable to reinstating as long as we, you know, develop something that's within some parameters the contact visits. And one thing that we had a concern about, Dr. Kalmanoff, I mean, you did reassure us that the video contact visits would not be a replacement for visits, or it would not shorten regular visits to the jail. And I want to be clear that the window contact visits did continue, but not the ones where people could be in the same room, or incarcerates could be in the same room and be able to touch their and hold their children and talk to their children direct without the barrier of the glass. And also, toward the end of the Community Justice Task Force meetings, we discovered something that I never heard tell of, and I was wondering, Dr. Kalmanoff, if you ever have a Bill of Rights of children of incarcerated parents. And it's a Bill of Rights, so in that respect, it is proposed rights as opposed to actual rights. But it was these rights, and there are 8. Of the 8, the 5th one includes the right of the child to talk to, see, and touch their parent, who is incarcerated. And the organization that started it, the San Francisco Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership in San Francisco, they developed these back in 2003, I believe that it was, about 10 years ago. And last year, the United Nations included large portions from the Children's Bill of Rights the Bill of Rights of Children of Incarcerated Parents in its resolutions for children. So if we are going to consider this a model criminal justice system that is supposed to be a part of the 21st century and in a first world country, I believe that this is something that we can have as a part of one of the committees to formulate here and apply it to the jails. And that organization has a whole Rights to Reality campaign and is willing to help and guide any entity with implementing these rights and fashioning it in whatever way is amenable to their particular facility. I did get together a letter that would have gone to you, Dr. Kalmanoff, but since you're here live and in person, that included some of the things that we want. Now, for a couple of things, we do feel like we did get some short-term gains, and that would be the visits, because, hopefully by the time there are, alternatives developed to incarceration, you perhaps won't need these kinds of visits in such large numbers. But but after all of those things have been implemented and you still have children who need to come see their parents, hopefully there are some things in place for them. So we feel like we had gains there, and also in addition to the fact that we don't really know how long it'll take to settle on which recommendations and so forth, but in the meantime, it's a shortcut, like a Band-Aid solution that we would welcome for the child contact visits to be reinstated. And we intend, as the Women in the Jail Work Group, to do more work on that. The other item was the registration plan that we would like for the jail to implement to help parents who have lost custody of their children as a result of whatever they're incarcerated for, to be able to take classes or be prioritized to take classes that go toward their social services plan of required courses for being able to regain custody of their children. Currently, none of the courses count, and the incarcerates often have to double take the classes, once on the inside of jail and then on the outside to take the ones that are approved by DCFS. And we would like for that system to prioritize them to be able to take these courses to be in place, so that when we work on other means of being able to get those classes approved or get them added to the jail program, that we would be able to, that would be something that would make it easier for them to access it already. Now, the two that we didn't get to, so we feel like there are representations in the final draft that accommodate that. Like on page 36, those top two bulleted points near the top, where you say implement system-wide gender-responsive services as well as classification systems, risk and needs assessment tools, staff training, and visiting policies. We feel that falls squarely within the purview of being able to get things that will be gender sensitive, like making sure that there are parent-child physical contact visits and not just window visits. And implement system-wide gender-responsive services as well as classification systems, risks and needs assessment tools, staff training, and visiting policies. Now, the two that would be more long-term and more...
Could you please, you've taken, I've given you more than 10 minutes.
Oh, is it more than 10 minutes?
I would appreciate it if you just wrap up a little bit. So
Sure.
that more people behind you might be able to speak to the issues as well.
Oh, okay, I thought you said earlier you weren't going to necessarily place a limit, so okay, I wasn't aware.
He said he was going to be reasonable.
Oh, okay.
I did say I could give you the whole evening, but I understand your position. It's important. If you could summarize a little bit for me.
Sure.
I'll give you a couple more
Let me try a question, because you and I have talked.
Yes.
Is there anything that you want that isn't in this report?
Yes.
Tell me what it is.
The last two things that relate with, you mentioned that I could almost read it straight from the letter here, but anyway, I'll just try to be quick about it. That the public defenders are not as independent as they need to be out from under the judgeship.
That's in the report.
Right. So what I'm trying, and you said that they've done some work on that already. You know, you mentioned that the CJEC, or however you call it, has already done some work toward that. What I'm interested in is making sure that the public defenders who have criminal cases that are also tied to child custody cases are also included among those public defenders who are made more independent. Because I have a feeling that child custody or family law related attorneys, because they're dealing with criminal cases that are connected to family, that they may get corralled to the side and, you know, told that they don't need to be as independent because it's family law as opposed to, you know, connected to family law instead of just strictly criminal laws.
And the second one?
And the second one is the use of the risk assessment tool for non-imminent abuse of spankings. Not that the spanking itself is necessarily abuse, but the parent may have abused spanking. Because across Illinois, including Champaign County, parents are being punished for utilizing the punishment of corporal discipline, but not all parents are punished for this after the arrival of the police upon a call. If they are connected or enfranchised in the community and own their own homes, they may likely get a pass. By contrast, we've seen that for the poor, low income, or otherwise vulnerable, especially when also minority, any marks left by a spanking, regardless of how long ago or where the intent is discipline, the parent has to go, and there's a whole litany of things that this parent has to go through. And so I'll get to the point here that if there could be well, after I list all these things, I'm not going to list them all here, I say good grief. If the physical results of the spankings are either old and or non-life threatening, then could there be a recommendation that a risk assessment be used specifically for these types of incidents to avoid all of this and get straight to education on child disciplinary alternatives meant to encourage a redirect with the parent?
I hear you. And I think both those last 2 points you and I are going to have to talk about because not quite as simple as you put it. But
Okay.
I do appreciate your input greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 7, please. Is there a number 7?
I'm Chuck Jackson. I live at 514 West Hill Street in Champaign. Two opening comments. I just wanted to really thank you, Mr. Chair, for relaxing the restriction. Hopefully, I won't speak longer than 5 minutes, not going that direction, but I just appreciate that this is important and you, on your own, relax that. I also wanted to say to you, Cal, that I really appreciate the grasp of the complexity. I mean, this is obvious that you know more about this than I do, but to refuse simple solutions is tremendous. So that said, I wanted to talk about the Criminal Justice Executive Council and specifically try to understand, first of all, this diagram that you had on appendix page 142. And
142?
Yeah, in the appendix.
That's Allegheny County.
I'm trying not to in any way, and please don't take it as being a grammar police, but I'm just trying to figure out how the text, the narrative, and the diagram go together. So you have a square box of executive committee, and I'm not sure if that corresponds with the executive council or if the Criminal Justice Advisory Board, which was what was it titled in the draft report, is the Criminal Justice Executive Council. Do you understand the question?
I do. The Criminal Justice Advisory Board is a group of citizens that get to meet with the council a couple times a year and give input from the community. The executive committee is the Criminal Justice Executive Council.
Okay.
There has been a bunch of nomenclature fussing around, and I can see why it would be
Sure.
confusing.
A colleague and I read this in totally two different ways, and we couldn't
Understood,
resolve.
understood, and I'm to blame for both.
Not a problem. So if you could then, there isn't very much text on the operation of the operating committee or how the Criminal Justice Advisory Board interacts. Specifically then, tonight you said there is, quote, major citizen input. And the sentence that I found is on the next page, 143, at the end of the second paragraph. It says, the public has much open access to the county board and various committees that can, in that way, input and communicate public concerns and priorities to CJAB. So if you could maybe speak on how all that works together, that would help me understand it.
Well, I can't because it isn't totally worked out. Y'all gonna have to do that. I'm about to leave on Friday, and I'm not gonna be here to do that. Believe me, if I could live next door and participate, even without any consulting arrangement, just to sort of speak with you all as this thing unfolds, I'd love to be part of it. But this has to be worked out by you all.
Sure.
Basically, I'm saying the criminal justice constitutional leadership
I get that.
cannot be controlled by
Sure.
citizens except at election. And
yet
that's just the way it is.
I appreciate that. I'm trying to understand how you're saying we have major citizen input, and with these arrows and so forth in the diagram, what you're
Because you elect this group, and you elect all of those people, and this report calls for a couple meetings or more a year of some citizen group or all citizens with a group that's going to be listening to you, speaking to this Criminal Justice Executive Council. It isn't worked out. And it's a failure of the report, in a sense, to not have a crystal ball and not be willing to dictate it.
Well, I'm not asking you to predict the future.
No, and I appreciate your appreciation of the work, so I know you're not coming after me. But I'm just, it's very difficult to say you all ought to have this group of people meet and run the system. There hasn't ever been that group meeting and running the system. It was informal. When I got to town, it got more formal.
Sure.
Good, that's good. And this report calls for some more dimensions of it, and that's good. But it's very hard to specify the future.
So I'm just asking for, taking the opportunity to try to tease out what you've thought that's not in here. So my follow-up to that would be, if you can comment on the 8 people you recommended, including a vice chancellor from the U of I, versus in the proposed bylaws of Champaign CJEC, which are taken from Allegheny County, and there's quite a few more. There's probably 20 or more members there, and
that's just different between Pittsburgh and Champaign-Urbana. In other words,
but there's representative crime victims, there's public defender, there's mayors, there's qualitatively different membership of the group.
But that's not for the core group of criminal justice executives.
Okay.
That's for the group that would be meeting to give them input.
Okay, so you're saying members here, this list is the advisory board, not the...
Yeah. Let me give you a lever on this one, because I can see and feel and listen and hear that you are of goodwill and we are not far apart.
Okay.
So don't take this as adversarial at all, because
I'm not approaching it that way either.
I think you're helping to build the building. The National Institute of Corrections, under the Department of Justice, Bureau of Prisons, has put out a kind of a handbook for criminal justice advisory boards and executive councils and groups such as that, how to form them, how to run them, how they work best, when they don't work, what the problems are, how the problems get solved. And that book, actually written by one of my consultants, Bob Cushman, for the National Institute of Justice, National Institute of Correction, is very much available to you free, and will give you a lot of leverage to try to have some impact on this process, which I think...
That's a great resource.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I have other questions,
Okay.
but there's other people too, so.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
do appreciate it. You touched on something that we hadn't discussed, and I think it's good. Thank you. Let's move on to number 8.
All right. Thanks for having me. My name's Scott Humphrey. I live at 509 South Race in Urbana. And I just want to credit this board with commissioning this report and responding to a lot of citizen input over the last 12, 18 months, and to Dr. Kamanoff for delivering something that I think is extremely useful and gives us, as you've described, kind of a menu of options. And so my comments are about the way that you discussed racial disparity in the report, which I think in some subtle ways you got at it very effectively. That kind of the key issue is too many African Americans are brought into the jail for nonviolent offenses. And we can get at that without having to be explicit in a lot of ways about racial disparity by just reducing the number of nonviolent intakes. So I want to appreciate that. But where I think you could have been more explicit, and I want to get a little bit of reflection from you, is with a couple of instruments that you call for to give more discretion, which I think is important. With law enforcement giving more discretion to write citations instead of arrests could reduce the number of African Americans brought into the jail. And if we introduce more pretrial discretion, including the risk assessments that we've talked about, then that also could reduce the number of African Americans in jail. But as you mentioned in the report, with both prosecutorial oversight and risk assessment, that putting those instruments in place by itself doesn't necessarily reduce disparity, that there has to be oversight to ensure that something like a risk assessment isn't weighed against African Americans or against folks who already have a criminal record, which tend to be African Americans. So what I'm curious about is why you didn't take the Community Justice Task Force recommendation to create a racial justice task force that could provide a level of oversight to ensure that these new instruments, if taken up, that create more discretion, are applied in a way that achieves more racial equity.
In other words, I kind of like the idea of the task force, but the task force can only be what the law allows, which is it can get data, it can digest the data, it can talk about the data, it can publicize what it thinks the data means, it can publicize its own recommendations about what the data should dictate should happen. But the oversight in our constitutional democracy is with the state attorney, the presiding judge, the sheriff, primarily, and the police chiefs coming out of the city councils. And you can't just write a report because you see a problem, which I saw and you saw, and everybody agreed to. There's nobody who's challenged this issue of racial disparity, really. Actually, not many people have challenged anything in this report, in effect. There've been quips and stuff, but nobody has said, oh no, there's no racial disparity anywhere. Nobody said. So, but you can't have oversight over it. Because if you do, you kind of knock the chair and knock the DA and knock the judge out of the picture and say, no, we'll take care of all this stuff. And that doesn't work. Oversight's the wrong word. That's why I didn't take your recommendation, because it isn't oversight. It is very effective democratic sniping. It is very effective community organizing. It is articulate advocacy. It is using data to put the lie to a lot of BS that is important BS. It's a lot of other things. And you're all good at it, and you should keep it up. But it's not oversight. There's nobody going to tell the sheriff how to run that jail unless it's a court order from some judge above the Champaign County jail or a Champaign County judge. There's nobody going to tell the judge. Nobody's got oversight over the judge. Nobody. Why? That's just the way it is. I didn't bring that to town.
Thank you, sir. All right, number 9. Do we have a number 9? Oh, we do have a number 9. That's a 6.
Isn't she an ex-board member?
Yes, ex-chair.
Is it true, I just heard that you used to be a chair of this board?
Hit the button on the bottom there.
This is new to me, to be over on this side and
I kind of like the setup, but it's going to take me a while to get used to it. I was just sitting there waiting on my turn, and I was thinking about the Emmys the other night. I didn't get to see it, but I saw the highlights the next day. And this one awardee, she won, and she went up there, and she had her acceptance speech, and she was like, "Thank you. I've got to go." And it's been called, it was the best acceptance speech at the Emmys. And I'm thinking, okay, so I don't want to keep, to take up a lot of your time, but I do want to say that I have to commend this board on this democratic process that you've taken up in terms of looking at this whole jail well, it's really not a building, but just actually taking a look at the whole system itself instead of, as Mr. Kavanaugh said, just, you know, we have a sheriff that could have came and said, I need a new building, but instead of saying, let's just build, we stepped back and we took a look at the whole process. But I more so want to say to Mr. Kavanaugh, I'm only sorry I wasn't on the board to be a part of one of the members that selected you to take a look at and study this problem, because you, sir, are you're very unique yourself. I think you're interesting, and I also think that you're extraordinary. The work that you did, your report, now I didn't read it from front cover to back cover. Unlike Danielle and their group, they were able to break it up in pieces and share, which I thought was very smart. I did skim, I did do the executive summary, I did look at enough of the report to know that you, sir, looked at this from a broad lens, and you were very fair in your summation of the report. So I appreciate the work that went into it. I've heard a lot of things from the public in terms of what I support, and I can break it down very simply by saying that I support the 3 R's, which is repurpose, reentry, and restorative justice. So, and how that's built in, I think Sophia, I have to add that in because I think that's really important when you talk about women and you look at the statistics of African-American children that are being raised by single-parent homes, and many of those are being raised by women. And so when they are incarcerated and they can't make contact with their kids, this is a problem, because if that's the parent at home, that's going to leave those children out there fending for themselves, and then you can see where they're raising themselves, and we know what could happen. So some of the things that she raised, I think, are important as well. But I support the repurpose, reentry, restorative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Number 10.
My name is Joyce Mass. I live at 607 Southwest Lawn in Champaign. I looked at the report. I saw under the reentry really nothing about jobs. There is you have talked about probation, help, support, but a job. We need to include emphasis on helping people find jobs with a living wage. My experience has been with people I know who've gone back to jobs, gone back to jail, is that they couldn't live on what they were able to find or what people were able to help them find. So we need to put funds into helping people find jobs as part of a reentry program with a livable wage.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I do believe that is an essential element of the reentry program and the discussion in the report, that jobs are key. I do believe it's in there.
Number 11.
Good evening. My name is Reverend Melinda Carr, and can you hear me?
Closer to you so we can hear you better, please. No, the whole unit.
Oh, the whole unit.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Reverend Melinda Carr. I am the president of the Minister Alliance of Champaign, Urbana, and vicinity. I live at 211 West Tremont Street in Champaign. And just wanted to make a few comments. We have not really been here to make any comments, and really appreciate those who have been coming out, the citizens who have been coming out all these months and doing research and having the courage to say the things that they've said, putting their necks on the line, just really in awe of the things that they have done to come forward as citizens of all different walks of life, color. And I read an article in Ebony, October Ebony. I was in the airport, so I looked at this article, and it's called The Village Keepers, October 2013 article of Ebony. And it says, just read a couple of paragraphs here. It says, homicides in Chicago dropped 27% as of the first week of July this year, compared with the same time in 2012. Last year, more than 500 incidents were recorded. The number of deaths often escalates during the summer months. Lately, however, the community of Auburn, Gresham has seen improvement. The area has had significantly fewer homicides compared to last year, when 43 killings were reported, according to the Chicago Police Department. Quote, with all of the violence erupting around us, we didn't have one shooting in the community, unquote, says Father Michael Fleffer, longtime activist and senior pastor of St. Sabina. After Sunday service, referring to the 4th of July holiday weekend shooting spree, during which there were more than 70 shootings in the city. Quote, not one. The answer to solving the violence is to invest in these young men by giving them jobs. It's not to invest more money into prisons, unquote. Many in Auburn Gresham feel that his bold stance of going out into the community to help initiate peace talks between gang leaders has been instrumental in reducing the shooting violence in the area. I thought that was very interesting. And the person just spoke before me spoke about jobs, so that's one thing I want to say, jobs. It's important, and you said that it's been addressed in the report, maybe more visible, that jobs are critical to the future. Maybe it's not really addressed as far as the sales tax being funding, the sales tax funding jobs right now in the report as we see it, but maybe that's a future thing, but it's critical to the future of the inmates that come back, that they do need jobs. They're going to have jobs. And then I think maybe earlier there was a reference to special needs housing. So when they get the job or training, they're going to have a place to sleep. So that's one other thing that we talked about as the Alliance, that the job, the training, and then that leads to the job, and then housing for those that come back, because it's hard for them to find a place to stay. There's transitional housing, but they need permanent housing to be able to come back into the community. And so also just piggybacking off of the others who have spoken and say that we appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak and to talk about these issues, because it is very important, and the different administration of the county board and then the authorities, the police, because this is the only way we can resolve these types of issues. And we really pray that there will be something done to not just talk and not just see a report, sit down and put on the shelf, but really action is taken after this is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 12. Is there a number 12? Is that it? Okay. First, I want to thank the board for being so patient tonight. I want to thank the public for coming out and their comments and questions, all insightful. I hope I gave you enough time to make your points. And I just want to say that this board will not stop with just having a report laid on our desk. This board will work to help to implement and work with our elected officials in working to help in stopping recidivism, helping to reduce our jail population, which will save us all money, and hopefully to resurrect those who have had a tough time with jobs, with education, but with training. The training is, to me, one of the key points that we need to make if we're going to apply these reforms. There are jobs out there, and there are manufacturing jobs, and there are companies that are asking for help, but we don't have the trained personnel. And so I think part of the programs we need will be training and education. So I want to thank all of you for coming, and I promise this will be just the beginning. This report is a roadmap to hoping to improve all areas of our justice system here in Champaign County. So I ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved by Mr. James. Come on, guys. Somebody don't want to. Ms. Astrid, we are adjourned. Thank you.